Chapter 641. There was no wind in the world, but the old cotton-padded robe fluttered. The eldest brother looked at the chief monk of Scripture, who was sitting cross-legged with a pale face. He said with a confused expression, "Teacher said that you can't do anything." The chief preaching monk looked at him and said calmly, "Many years ago, I did make a promise to the headmaster that I wouldn't do anything unless it was the end of the world. However, the daughter of Yama came to the human world, which was the end of the world. Since then, I have been reading scriptures every night and finally mastered the Buddha's words. I didn't do anything, I just spoke." The eldest brother was startled and shook his head. Junimo is right. The chief preaching monk didn't understand what he meant. He put his palms together and continued chanting. Only Ninkei and Chi Mei knew the words. All monks should die. Chi Mei's expression changed slightly, but he didn't show any anger. He just kept silent. Ninkei was angry, but he was also extremely frightened. The chief preaching monk's chanting could affect the aura of heaven and earth in such a large area around the White Tower Temple. He had created a world in the human world with the Buddha's words. The state he showed was too terrifying. Ninkei had to admit that the old monk sitting cross-legged with his staff was the most powerful cultivator he had ever seen in his life. He was even stronger than the sword that Liu Bai had used to stab at the Lang Temple from beyond the sky. The chanting continued. The lake was still, and the tower light was condensed. The White Tower Temple seemed to have become a Buddhist country from the beginning of the world. The aura of heaven and earth became extremely peaceful, vaguely connected to a state above the 5 states of Taoism. However, it also had a strong sense of suppression. In such a world, cultivators couldn't control the chi of heaven and earth and were no different from ordinary people. Tens of thousands of Yueluan citizens didn't know what was happening in the Taoist field. They couldn't hear or see, and even if they did, they couldn't understand. They could only instinctively feel that something very solemn and profound was happening. So they bowed to the chief preaching monk again and didn't dare to get up. The aura of heaven and earth gradually calmed. Cultivators couldn't control flying swords, and Buddhist ascetic monks couldn't use all kinds of means. But they could walk, especially the ascetic monks who trained their bodies and spirits in the wilderness day and night, and the West Hill Divine Guards who were martial cultivators. They still had some power. Master Chi Mei led dozens of ascetic monks to the field. More than 10 West Hill Divine Guards, led by 2 priests in red, walked into the crowd. It seemed that they would soon reach Ning, Quebec Ning. Kei twisted his wrist slightly and tightly held the hilt of the Padao. Looking at the crowd, he frowned and frowned. Chi was the chief preaching monk. Although the Great Spirit was suppressed by the chief preaching monk's words, his devil's monk's body was still strong enough. After Chi and King Xian's preaching monk's words. However, Master Chi Mei's body had become Buddha, and he was also a very strong martial artist. Ning Kei didn't have the confidence to defeat him in this situation. What made him even more uneasy was that eldest brother and Song Song's bodies were as weak as ordinary people. How could he protect them from harm? In the land of Buddha in the world, the Buddha's words rang like a distant bell. No matter how strong Ning Kei was, he couldn't leave the Buddha's land. No matter how tough he was, he couldn't help but feel a little desperate at this moment. At this moment, eldest brother spoke again. He was forced out of the limitless state by the Buddha's words. His face was as pale as paper, and his thin body hung in the air like a willow branch by the lake. But his face and body were still so clean, without a speck of dust. He looked at the chief preaching monk, and a look of firmness suddenly appeared in his clean eyes. He said slowly, "The headmaster of academy once said that a scholar who cherishes life is not enough to be a scholar. A Buddha who cherishes the world is not enough to be called a Buddha." Eldest brother still spoke very slowly and seemed very elegant. His voice was still so gentle and amiable, but his tone was so firm and firm. What he said was taught to him by his teacher many years ago. Like all the students in the back of the mountain of the academy, he never doubted his teacher's words, so he thought that his teacher's words must be reasonable. Reasonable, so of course it was effective. This was what the academy pursued. Ning-Ke didn't understand why eldest brother suddenly said such words at this time, and neither did Master Chimei. The approaching ascetic monks and West Hill divine guards subconsciously stopped. Only the chief preaching monk had enough wisdom and experience to understand the meaning of eldest brother's words. His expression suddenly became solemn, and he looked at him in surprise. His right hand left the staff. A scholar who cherishes life is not enough to be a scholar. A Buddha who cherishes the world is not enough to be called a Buddha. When eldest senior brother said this, the originally quiet world suddenly underwent some extremely subtle changes, and one could faintly hear the sound of cracking. The White Tower Temple was still the White Tower Temple. It was normal as far as the eye could see, but something seemed to be broken. Gradually, a breeze rose on the surface of the lake, and the frozen lake began to ripple. The willow branches by the lake seemed to be pulled by an invisible string, and then swayed back and began to swing for the first time. It turned out that the world of the Buddha land was broken. The expression on the chief preaching monk's face was extremely complicated. He didn't expect that Mr. First's casual words could break his dharma of words, and was about to destroy his world of the Buddha land. Although Mr. First of the Academy was already the top figure in the cultivation world, he was after all only a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. How could he do this? And when did he understand such a divine sense? As the lake wind rose again, the willow branches swayed again, and the ripples on the lake gradually expanded. The chief preaching monk's expression became more and more serious. He reached out his right hand to point at eldest brother and said quickly, "As I have heard, there is a mountain named Prajna. It is 108,000 times heavier than Tianchi Mountain. It can fill the storm sea and suppress all demons." The chi of heaven and earth in the White Tower Temple that was previously quiet suddenly rolled violently. Ordinary people couldn't see it, but cultivators could feel it. It was rolling like heavy rain clouds, and they could feel the terrifying power contained in it. They instinctively felt a strong sense of vigilance, and even wanted to avoid it. The violent chi of heaven and earth suddenly compressed at an unimaginable speed, and then turned into a seemingly infinite mountain. It broke through the air and blasted at eldest brother's body that was gradually getting rid of the restraint of the Buddha's words. The Buddhist temple was still quiet, and there was no sound. But eldest brother felt that his ears rang with the sound of countless boulders crushing his body, as if a mountain had already pressed on his shoulders. His body was originally very ordinary. Compared to Jun Mo and Ning-Ke, his shoulders seemed to be unable to bear much weight. He suddenly tottered, and the soles of his shoes touched the ground. His knees gradually bent, but he still refused to fall. There was a puff. Eldest brother spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. He stared at the chief preaching monk's eyes and rebuked him directly. Confucius said, "Everyone in the world travels in the same carriage. We should not look inside. Don't speak quickly. Don't point personally." Even at this moment, when he spoke with a reprimanding tone, his voice was still so gentle, making others want to get close to him. It contained a powerful, persuasive aura, and it also contained an extremely powerful might. When the words "don't look inside" came out, the chief preaching monk suddenly felt a little sore in his eyes. When the words "don't speak quickly" came out, the scripture he was reciting quickly stopped. When the words "don't point personally" came out of eldest brother's mouth, the chief preaching monk suddenly felt that the giant mountain named Sumeru was between his fingers. His arm fell down and could no longer point at eldest brother's body. The chief preaching monk's expression became more and more solemn. His long silver eyebrows fluttered, and his lips opened slightly. He recited another scripture. This time, he recited very slowly, but every word was like thunder and extremely strict. "This is what I have heard. With the power of Samadhi, all the mountains, trees, plants, and land in the mist world become the 7 treasures. Everyone can see it and listen to the wonderful teachings in front of the Buddha. As you think, you may see yourself in green, yellow, white, purple, red, black, or wind, or fire, or emptiness, or fire, 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 or water, or water foam, or mountains, or emperor, or flowers, or Garuda, or stars, or elephants, or wild foxes. The Buddha's words resounded through the temple like thunder and kept exploding in the air. The lake suddenly became uneasy. The willow branches on the shore broke and fell, and the white tower glowed with colorful light. The tens of thousands of believers who were kneeling on the ground finally heard the thunderous Buddha's voice. They raised their heads subconsciously and looked up at the sky, but there was no trace of lightning. Countless auras of heaven and earth came from all directions of the Yuan kingdom, stirring up dust and wind, breaking trees and startling beasts. They arrived at Chaoyang City and went to the White Tower Temple. The clouds in the sky had covered Chaoyang City for a whole winter. There was no change except for the continuous gathering of clouds and thickening of them. However, even the strange clouds seemed to feel the horror of the chief preaching monk's Buddha's words and began to stir uneasily. The dark gray clouds rolled and twisted violently. It looked as if there were thousands of black snakes twisting and twisting inside the clouds. Occasionally, the clouds would be torn apart, revealing a gap for a brief moment. Sunlight would shine through the gap, but it would be scattered by the clouds into countless colors and twisted into countless shapes. The colors of the heavenly light fell on the White Tower Temple. They were green, white, or black. People looked at the colors on their bodies and were at a loss. In the eyes of the cultivators, the heavenly light that was twisted into countless shapes was even more terrifying, because in their consciousness, the heavenly light turned into Buddhist Bantis holding Vajra, ferocious strange beasts of the Buddhist sect, and countless water and fire pouncing on them. Ninkane knew that this was not an illusion, nor was it the chief preaching monk's spiritual world. It was the real aura of heaven and earth. The chief preaching monk had used the supreme Buddha's power to simulate the aura of heaven and earth into the shapes of Buddhas in the sky. Blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. Under the supreme Buddha's power and before the Buddhas in the sky, he had no power to resist. He could only slowly kneel down, his face pale with pain. His snow mountain, an ocean of chi, seemed to be about to be destroyed. Sang Sang, who was on his back, was in an even worse condition. When the heavenly light shone through the gap in the clouds and fell on her, her body was suddenly plated with a layer of black. Although her face was pale, there was a faint dark gray color. She kept vomiting blood, just like what happened in the back temple of Lang Temple. All of it had turned into something like ink. At this time in the White Tower Temple, the only one who could compete with the words of the chief preaching monk was the eldest brother of the academy. Naturally, he became the main target of the supreme Buddha's power. There were no colors in eldest brother's eyes. There were no wild foxes, no giant elephants, no merciless floods, and no raging fire. He only saw the Buddhas in the sky, accompanied by the stars, rushing towards him. Every king in the ancient myths had supreme Buddha's power. Every Buddha in the Buddhism sect had supreme Buddha's power. Every star had the power of heaven and earth that could not be shaken. Eldest brother's bones began to crack. Blood seeped from the corner of his eyes. His face grew paler, and even his state was on the verge of collapse. However, his expression was still so resolute. Eldest brother raised his head and looked at the raging dark clouds. He looked at the seven-colored light that descended from the sky, the ancient gods and Buddhas, and the stars that fell like rain. He shouted, "I do not speak of strange powers and gods." He didn't speak. The chief preaching monk's silver eyebrows drooped. A streak of blood suddenly flashed across his old face. The Buddha's words suddenly stopped. Strange, force, chaotic, God. Eldest brother spat out a mouthful of blood with every word he said. He had spat out blood 4 times in a row. His face became extremely pale, like a clean snowfield that no one had ever seen before. As soon as he finished speaking, the clouds above Chaoyang City suddenly became still. The violent clouds that had been tearing each other squeezed together in fear, and the gaps that had been opened closed immediately. Not a single ray of light could penetrate the clouds and shine on the ground. The colorful colors disappeared instantly, and the White Tower Temple returned to its original appearance. The giant elephants and wild foxes formed by the power of Buddha made a few whining sounds and scattered into countless light spots, disappearing into the sky. As for the legendary venerables of the Buddhist sect who were holding the golden pestle, the sages in the ancient myths, and the stars that fell like rain, they instantly disappeared without a trace. He didn't speak of strange powers and chaotic gods. All the Buddhas retreated. The aura of heaven and earth from all over the Yueluan kingdom gradually stopped, bringing a strong sandstorm to Chaoyang City. The White Tower Temple, which had just returned to its original appearance, suddenly became extremely dark. The chief monk of Scripture silently looked at the figure that could fall at any time in the sandstorm. He looked at his cotton jacket that had been soaked in blood, and his silver eyebrows slowly fluttered. No one knew what he was thinking. Tens of thousands of people in the White Tower Temple looked at the sky in shock. They didn't understand what had just happened. Many of them began to rub their eyes, wondering if they had hallucinations. Master Chi Mei and the cultivators of the Buddhism and Taoism sects looked at the scholar in the field. Their faces were full of shock. Even Chi Mei's eyes were full of awe. Everyone knew that the scholar had been seriously injured in order to resist the chief monk's Buddhist words. However, his words could make all the Buddhas disappear, which was enough to shock the world. Mr. First of the Academy was indeed Mr. First of the Academy. Eldest brother raised his right arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the chief monk of Scripture and said to Ning Ke behind him, "Teacher said that a gentleman does not stand in a dangerous place. If we don't leave now, when will we?" Ning Ke looked at eldest brother's back and suddenly turned around and rushed out of the crowd. Eldest brother coughed in pain and disappeared again. A huge wind rolled up beside the chief monk of Scripture. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 642. In fact, it was not the wind, but the aura of heaven and earth that was invisible to the naked eye and could never be perceived by ordinary people. It revolved around the chief, preaching monk's body and drove the flow of air. The limitless state, which was above the 5 states, was a state that was hard to understand, but it did exist. Eldest brother moved at an unimaginable speed, or in a way that surpassed the speed between the countless doors of the aura of heaven and earth that was invisible to the naked eye. The aura of heaven and earth rolled into a turbulent current, completely isolating the chief preaching monk from the real world. At this time, the world that the chief preaching monk saw was countless monotonous lines. He could not hear any sound, and his voice could not reach the real world. He was temporarily separated from the real world. Ninkei did not miss this opportunity. He began to flee with Sang Sang on his back. The gods and Buddhas that were formed by the chi of heaven and earth were shattered into nothingness by eldest brother's words. They suddenly lost their image and turned into countless shiny fragments. He passed through them, and the fragments fell on his and Sang Sang's bodies and heads. They were stuck by the thick blood on their bodies and sparkled as if they were embedded with countless diamonds. The cultivators from both the Buddhism and Taoism sects had already surrounded them from all directions. Ning Ke leaped across and had just found a relatively weak point to break through when he found Chi Mei not far in front of him. The chief preaching monk was temporarily trapped by eldest brother. Master Chi Mei was the most powerful, and Ning Ke was most wary of him. But this powerful cultivator from the Xiankong Temple did not give him any chance. Facing Chi Mei and the crowd of people in the White Tower Temple, Ning Ke did not have the confidence to escape Chaoyang City with Sang Sang. The crowd had already surrounded them, blocking the bridges and corridors of the White Tower Temple. The ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect began to gather. 2 red-robed priests appeared in front of the crowd with more than 10 West Hill Divine Guards. Ning Ke felt a chill, but the next moment he noticed something strange. The 2 red-robed priests from the West Hill Divine Palace had strange expressions on their faces. The 2 red-robed priests looked at Ning Ke, who was running at a high speed. They were not vigilant, frightened, or angry. They seemed very calm, with infinite respect and a touch of determination. Ninkei was sure that he had never seen the two red-robed priests before. Then he noticed that when the two red-robed priests showed respect and determination, they were not looking at him, but at Sang on his back. The two red-robed priests stood beside Chi Mei. More than 10 West Hill Divine Guards and dozens of ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect were gathering toward them. They intended to form a thick wall here and stop Ning Quebec. A pure white flame slowly burned from the palms of the two priests in red, instantly illuminating the quiet temple that was shrouded in clouds. It was the Haotian divine light. The eyes of the dozen or so West Hill Divine Guards brightened under the Haotian divine light. Their previous fear of Ning Kei had turned into confidence and pride, as well as the fanaticism of martyrs. Looking at the Haotian divine light burning in the palms of the two red-robed priests, Ning Kei's pupils shrank and his heart was filled with great vigilance. Sang, who was once the Lady of Light, possessed the purest Haotian divine light in the world. He was no stranger to the West Hill divine skill. He knew that even in the West Hill Divine Palace, where there were countless powerhouses, there were very few priests who could cultivate the divine skill. But today there were two of them. The West Hill Divine Palace was indeed powerful. Seeing Ning Kei's figure getting closer and closer, the determination in the eyes of the two red-robed priests became more and more solemn and devout. The Haotian divine light burning in their palms became more and more intense. For holy white flames rose from their palms, illuminating the entire place. Master Chi Mei looked at Ning Kei and sighed. He slowly moved 2 steps to the side. Ning Kei understood what he meant. If Master Chi Mei and the two red-robed priests joined hands, he would not be able to break through. But he did not kill the little boy, so Chi Mei gave him a chance to fight with the two powerful red-robed priests first. However, both Ning Kei and Master Chi Mei did not expect that the two priests in red from the West Hill Divine Palace were not using their divine skills on Ning Kei, but on themselves. The flames of Haotian's divine flame gushed out from the palms of the two red-robed divine priests, gushed out from under their red robes, drilled through the gaps of the fine cloth, gushed out from their mouths, noses, eyes, ears, and every strand of hair and pore. The two divine priest bodies seemed to have turned into 2 bright lamps. Master Chi Mei instantly sensed that great danger was coming, but he had no time to avoid it. With a muffled groan, he sat cross-legged on the ground, formed the lotus emblematic gesture, and covered his eyes with his hands. The two red-robed priests looked at Sang in the distance and smiled calmly. Their smiles were illuminated by the light. Then their bodies shone brightly and suddenly burned themselves. Then they self-exploded. Boom, boom, boom. The chi of heaven and earth in the White Tower Temple suddenly became chaotic. The lake water shook violently. Countless weeping willows broke and fell to the ground. Countless blood and broken limbs flew in the air. In an instant, many people died. The West Hill Divine Skill was the highest Taoist access to save and cure people. However, who would have thought that once they decided to burn themselves with light, they could kill people and have such a terrible power? The dense mass of people was forcibly blasted open by the explosion of the two red-clothed divine officials. In that empty area, there was only death, and no one was able to stand. As for the bodies of the two red-robed priests, they had already turned into ashes in the terrible self-explosion. There was no trace of them. Only the fragments of their red robes slowly fell in the air, like coagulated blood. A piece of the red robe floated to Ning Kei's shoulder. Sang stretched out her slightly trembling fingers and picked up the piece of clothing. She looked a little confused. She did not know why the two red-robed priests had self-exploded so tragically, but she saw the way the two priests looked at her before they died, so she knew that it was all for her. The smoke and dust gradually dispersed. The White Tower Temple was a mess. There were cries and moans of the wounded everywhere. Looking around, there was a river of blood and piles of broken limbs. It was a terrible scene. There were countless deep bloodstains on Master Chi Mei's body, as well as many scorch marks. Although his body had become a Buddha, He was still seriously injured in the face of the self-explosion of two priests in red from West Hill. If he hadn't stepped aside when he saw Ning Ke coming over, he would have been even more seriously injured at this time. He put down his palms that covered his eyes and looked at the scene. His face became extremely serious. He did not find Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama. The dozens of black crows had flown far away. I made a huge mistake. I thought riding on an empty stomach would make me feel better, but I forgot that I'm a foodie, so I feel terrible riding. I'll go eat first, then I'll continue writing. I'll have at least 3 chapters today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 643. An arrow hit Ning Ke's shoulder heavily. The sharp arrowhead tore his shirt, but did not penetrate deep into his flesh. It only left a shallow wound. Sang Sang, who was holding the black umbrella behind him, trembled slightly. Countless arrows fell like a rainstorm. The big black umbrella behind them was like a small black boat in the ocean, constantly trembling, as if it would capsize and sink to the bottom of the sea at any time. Leaving the White Tower Temple did not mean that they could leave Chaoyang City. The Yueluan Kingdom's troops from other counties had already taken control of the entire capital. There were archers everywhere in the streets. Ning Ke's body was strong, but he was still slightly injured by the continuous arrows. The big black umbrella shielded Sang Sang from most of the arrows, but the holes on the umbrella were extremely dangerous. To avoid the dense rows of archers, he did not choose to launch a surprise attack on the long street. Instead, he began to circle around the streets and alleys. The black crows flew above his head, making unpleasant cawing sounds. However, the truly brave and fearless residents of Chaoyang City were still in the White Tower Temple, so not many dared to stop him. Circling around would take some time. There was still a long way to go before he reached the city gate. What made him uneasy and nervous was that he finally heard the thundering sound of hooves from afar. The heavy cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom had finally arrived. The heavy cavalry was the most powerful means of dealing with cultivators in the human world. Although the heavy cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom was much weaker than the black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire and the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, they could still overwhelm Ning Ke and Sang Sang to death as long as there were enough of them. At this moment, a horse carriage with the emblem of the Divine Hall appeared at the entrance of the alley in front of them. Ning Ke stopped in his tracks. The curtains of the carriage were lifted, revealing an aged face and a red divine robe. Looking at the old priest in the horse carriage, Sang Sang subconsciously clenched her fists. There was a piece of red cloth in her hand, but she did not know which one of the 2 priests in red had self-destructed. Ning Ke sped up and rushed into the horse carriage. The horse carriage started slowly and then gradually sped up, rushing out of the alley. The old priest in red asked, "Which direction?" Ning Ke replied, "North." Previously in the White Tower Temple, the 2 priests in red from the West Hill used their divine skills to explode themselves to clear the way for him and Sang Sang. Only then did he have the opportunity to avoid Master Chi Mei and successfully escape into Chaoyang City. The divine skill of Haotian Taoism was a kind dharma and was regarded as the greatest gift that Haotian could give to his followers. In the West Hill scriptures, using the divine skill to self-destruct was regarded as a great blasphemy to Haotian and was strictly prohibited. It was said that after death, the person who did so would never be able to enter the divine kingdom of Haotian, and his soul could only drift alone in the underworld for eternity. For ordinary believers of Haotian, not being able to enter the holy kingdom of Haotian was an unacceptable and cruel punishment. Moreover, the 2 red-robed priests could cultivate the divine skill, so their faith in Haotian must be extremely firm. So what was the reason that made the 2 red-robed priests willing to sink into the underworld to save him? Sang Sang vaguely sensed it, but Ning Ke had no time to think about it. He had been puzzled until he saw the old priest in the horse carriage. Both he and Sang Sang had seen this old priest in the Taoism temple in the kingdom of Qi. The old priest's name was Chun Siyuan, and he was a red-robed priest of the West Hill Divine Palace stationed in the kingdom of Qi. He was highly respected in the kingdom of Qi and most importantly, he was from the divine hall of light. Sang Sang leaned on Ning Kei's shoulder and blinked her eyelashes. She said sadly, "Why do you have to do this?" Chen Siyuan said humbly, "This is our own choice. Even if we can't enter the divine kingdom of Haoyan, we won't feel any regret. Great divine priest, you don't have to be sad." Ning Kei was driving at this time, but he heard the words very clearly. He was sensitive to the fact that the old priest did not call Sang Sang the Lady of Light like he did in the kingdom of Qi, but directly called her the Great Divine Priest. He was even more sure that his guess was correct. He asked, "Those two priests are?" Chen Siyuan looked a little sad and said indifferently, "Hua Yin is the court priest of the kingdom of Song, and Song Sisi has always been in the Great River Kingdom. If they were reluctant to leave the glory of the human world, they would not have followed me to Yuelun." The red-robed priest had a very high status in Haoyan Taoism. The West Hill Divine Palace was ordinary on the Peach Mountain, but as long as the red-robed priests were sent to the human world, they would often have the dignity and power of an emperor, just like Chen Siyuan in the kingdom of Qi. Ning Kei became even more silent when he heard the origin of the two red-robed priests. The carriage of the West Hill Divine Palace ran wildly in Chaoyang City. The black raven flew over again and circled around the carriage. Ning Kei was very familiar with the streets of Chaoyang City, and maybe because of the Divine Hall emblem on the carriage, the cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom was afraid of it. They managed to break through several obstructions without any danger. The dense sound of horse hooves and bamboo flutes rang again in Chaoyang City. The cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom finally came to their senses and began to chase the carriage. The ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect also began to gather in the direction of the Black Raven. Ning Kei turned to look at the white pagoda in the distance to his right. He was very worried about eldest brother who was still there and did not know the final result of the battle with the chief preaching monk. At this time, he suddenly saw that Song Song's trousers on her calf had been torn. There was an extremely deep wound there. It must have been caused by the big black umbrella when she was attacked by the archers, and a piece of flesh was torn by the arrowhead. It must have been very painful, but she did not make any sound. They were close to the North City Gate. The carriage had taken a detour in the city to avoid the archers and cavalry. The ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect had already arrived there, and Ning Kei could even sense the aura of Master Chi Mei. Chen Siyuan looked in the direction of the North City Gate. The wrinkles on his face became deeper, but his eyes were extremely calm. It was the true calmness of someone who did not even care about death. This calmness showed that he was extremely determined. He looked at Sang Sang and the wound on her leg. The arrow wound on Song Song's calf did not bleed, perhaps because she had lost too much blood recently. However, there were some faint traces of black blood on the edge. Chen Siyuan said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Great Divine Priest, please tell me that we did not do anything wrong." Sang Sang looked at this loyal old subordinate and felt a little sad. She was ready to tell the truth. Ning Kei waved the horsewhip and lashed in front of the carriage. The whip was loud and clear. This horsewhip seemed to be lashing on Song Song's heart. Sang Sang clenched the red cloth in her palm so tightly that her nails seemed to pierce into her flesh. After a moment of silence, she looked at the wrinkles on Chen Siyuan's face and said calmly, "Light will never make mistakes." Hearing her answer, the deep wrinkles on Chen Siyuan's face stretched out. He seemed to be 10 years younger in an instant and was full of vitality. He knelt in front of her and piously kissed the back of her foot. There were no other people outside the North City Gate, only dozens of ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect. Master Chi Mei stood in front of these ascetic monks. His pale face looked very calm. The wounds on his body were still bleeding. The self-explosion of the two priests in red had caused him a lot of damage. In particular, the divine light ashes in his wounds were like light chips. Not only did they not have any healing effect, but they continued to cut his flesh. Logically speaking, he and these ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect should have a higher chance of winning if they intercepted Ning Kei within the city. However, he chose to fight outside the city. This was because Ning Kei did not pull out his padao when he faced the little boy in the White Tower Temple. As a high monk of the Buddhism sect, why couldn't he not harm the innocent? A carriage rushed out of the seemingly empty city gate of Chaoyang City, bringing with it a cloud of dust. Master Chi Mei silently chanted the name of Buddha and slowly raised his right hand. His index finger and thumb pointed at the horse. He actually used his incomplete hand to display the complete Buddhist mantra Mahamudra. The carriage did not stop. Instead, it instantly broke through the powerful aura of Buddhism and continued to crash into Master Chi Mei and the dozens of ascetic monks. The reason was that the carriage suddenly burned. It was not an ordinary burning. It was burning with Hao Yian's divine light. The Hao Yian's divine light that could purify everything in the world gushed out from the curtain of the carriage and instantly broke through the shroud of the mantra Mahamudra. Master Chi Mei suddenly froze. After the two priests in red in the White Tower Temple self-exploded, he knew that there were people in the West Hill Divine Palace who did not want the daughter of Yama to die. Therefore, he was extremely vigilant. However, he still did not expect that there would be another priest who willingly fell into the underworld. Moreover, looking at the Hao Yian's divine light that gushed out from the carriage, the priest in red was even more powerful. The burning carriage continued to move forward. Master Chi Mei hurriedly ordered the monks to retreat. His heart became heavier. What happened to the West Hill Divine Palace? What happened to the Hao Yian Taoism sect? In the entire Hao Yian Taoism sect, there were no more than 10 priests in red who could cultivate divine skills. Today, 3 of them actually came to Chaoyang City. And these 3 priests in red actually betrayed the West Hill Divine Palace to help the daughter of Yama escape. A blazing and bright ball of light appeared in the field outside Chaoyang City. The burning carriage instantly shattered and then turned into nothingness. Instead, it was replaced by countless powerful divine lights that gushed out and scattered in all directions. The wind was blowing and the gravel was rolling. Dozens of Buddhism sect cultivators were shaken away. Master Chi Mei bore the brunt of it and was seriously injured again. When the priest in red, Chen Siyuan, began to burn the last of his life, Ning Ke had already jumped off the carriage from behind with Sang Sang on his back. Then, under the cover of the flame, he sprinted forward. The burning carriage was the most fearless vanguard, as well as the most valiant paving the way. The ball of light that the old priest exchanged for with his life shook the field outside the city. In the wind and gravel, Ning Ke carried Sang Sang on his back and rushed through the Buddhism sect powerhouses who had been shaken down. Sang Sang buried her head behind his shoulder. She did not look at the divine light that was falling everywhere in the field and clenched her fists. Ning Ke ran and looked at the great green mountain not far away in the north. He whistled. The sound of the whistle was neither loud nor sharp. It seemed to be carelessly blown, but the black crows flying in the sky heard it very clearly and responded with unpleasant cawing sounds. In the distant great green mountain, there came a sad neigh of a horse. I'm suddenly excited to write and haven't eaten yet. Go eat now and try to finish the 3rd chapter before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 644. The big black horse had been living in the great green mountain this winter. It did not feel lost after leaving Ning Ke's side, nor did it have any problems in life. Instead, it was free from the confinement. It chewed flowers, ate meat, slept lazily, and basked in the sun all day long. It was so happy that even the dark clouds that shrouded Chaoyang City only worried it for half a day. However, recently, countless powerhouses gathered in Chaoyang City like the pictures in the sky. Especially since this morning, when the chi of heaven and earth in the city was in chaos, it knew that its happy time was coming to an end. It had no choice but to find the bushes, endure the thorns, and dig the ground covered with thick leaves. Its front hooves were very powerful. Once it kicked with all its strength, it was much more powerful than the hoes of ordinary laborers. It did not take long for it to kick away all the leaves and dig out the pit. The black carriage lay quietly in the pit. Except for some dust, it was not damaged at all. The lasso and shafts were slightly erected in front of it, indicating that it had long been prepared. The big black horse sighed and lowered its head to get into the lasso. Then it exerted all its strength and stamped its 4 hooves on the slanting wall. It spent a lot of effort and finally dragged the heavy carriage to the ground. It dragged the carriage out of the thorns and through the dense forest. It was slightly relieved when it did not see any tourists along the way. Then it realized why there were no tourists and became very worried. It came to the grassy slope in the south and looked toward Chaoyang City. It panted slightly and waited nervously. After waiting for a long time, it finally heard the familiar whistle. The whistle was very soft, but the big black horse heard it clearly. In its world, the whistle was a rope that would bring it to its death. To its annoyance, it had thought that it hated the whistle, but after hearing it, it found that it could not help but be excited. It could not help but feel ashamed. With such complicated feelings, the big black horse neighed violently and dragged the heavy black carriage along the grassy slope in the south of the Great Green Mountain toward the field outside Chaoyang City angrily. When it rushed to the field, it saw at least hundreds of cavalrymen rushing out of Chaoyang City and chasing after that figure. It could not help but become angrier. It panted fiercely and sped up again. On the vast field north of the city, hundreds of cavalrymen of the Yueluan kingdom came with the wind and dust. Their hooves were as dense as rain, and their momentum was astonishing. They formed a huge fan. About 1,000 feet in front of the fan, Ning Ke kept running with Sang Sang on his back. He listened to the clear and loud hoofbeats behind him and watched the black horse carriage getting closer and closer. He was very nervous. Seeing that the situation was dangerous, the big black horse neighed violently. Dragging the heavy carriage, it sped up again and turned into a cloud of black smoke. It arrived before the Yueluan kingdom cavalry swallowed the figure. Ning Ke lowered his body and jumped into the black horse carriage like lightning. At this time, hundreds of cavalrymen of the Yueluan kingdom had also caught up with the black carriage. If the carriage could not stop, it would immediately be surrounded by these cavalrymen. The big black horse neighed again. Its thick lips trembled violently in the wind. Its big white teeth, which still had some rabbit meat left from last night, looked especially scary in the light. It suddenly jumped to the left. The Yueluan kingdom's war horses at the front heard the horses neigh and looked at it. For some reason, they felt a chill in their bodies. Their legs suddenly weakened, and they fell to the ground with a thud, causing a cloud of smoke and dust to splash. The big black horse forced a turn, but the heavy carriage continued to move forward according to inertia. With a very strong force, the rope was deeply tied around its smooth neck, leaving a bloody mark and a few strands of its hair falling off. With another violent neigh, the big black horse used all its muscles and forcibly stopped the carriage from moving forward. The carriage tilted and was about to fall. The steel wheels that were deeply embedded in the soil shook up a lot of soil on the ground. The soil was like stones, smashing on the faces of the Yueluan kingdom's war horses that were rushing at the front, but luckily did not fall. For a moment, only the frightened neighs of the horses could be heard. The fan-shaped charge of hundreds of cavalrymen was gradually disrupted. The carriage tilted the moment Ning Ke jumped into the carriage with Sang Sang on his back. It was extremely dangerous, and he fell twice. At this time, he finally managed to stabilize his body and hit a spot on the carriage wall with his palm. The crystal in his palm was embedded in the talisman array in the carriage wall. A paper talisman turned into green smoke between his fingers. The talisman power suddenly came out and helped the talisman array on the carriage wall to activate at high speed. There was a very slight sound, like a feather floating in the air, and the heavy carriage suddenly became much lighter. The steel wheels floated out of the ground. The big black horse was the first to notice the change. It neighed happily and kicked its four hooves as fast as lightning, dragging the carriage towards the north like a light cloud of dust. The big black horse's speed was really unreasonably fast. Once the talisman array on the carriage was activated, no one in the world could catch up with it except for cultivators in the distanceless state. The hundreds of cavalrymen of the Yueluan kingdom were already dumbfounded by the black smoke, not to mention catching up with it. As the big black horse galloped wildly, it turned its head to look at the silly war horses and cavalrymen of the Yueluan kingdom in the distance and neighed arrogantly. It thought to itself, "Are they stupid to compete with me in speed?" When it passed by the Daqing mountain, Its complacency turned into reluctance and regret. It thought to itself that if it left today, whether it fled with Ning-Ke or returned to the back of the mountain of the academy, it would never be able to enjoy such happiness again. Thinking of this, the big black horse could not help but sigh and neighed loudly. In the Daqing mountain, the birds and beasts, tigers, leopards, wolves, and bears who had been humiliated and harmed for a whole winter trembled with joy when they heard the horse's neigh. They thought to themselves that the master had finally left and he should never come back. The black carriage left Chaoyang City. The dark cloud that had shrouded the city for a whole winter also slowly left Chaoyang City and moved towards the north in the high sky. The cloud layer was very high, so it seemed to be moving slowly, but in fact it was moving at an amazing speed. Master Chi Mei withdrew his gaze from the sky and took the reins from his side. He led dozens of ascetic monks and chased towards the north. However, he knew the speed of the black carriage under the cloud layer and knew that he and his people would not be able to catch up with it. The dark cloud left, and the sunshine that had not been seen for many days finally sprinkled generously on Chaoyang City. The people of Chaoyang City rarely saw the blue sky, but they did not show any joy. Under the blue sky, the white tower that had regained its clear light looked exceptionally beautiful. The lake reflected the skylight and the shadows of the trees. There was still a lot of blood on the ground, and the corpses of the people had been moved away. On the open space by the lake, the eldest brother appeared. He was coughing desperately and painfully. He coughed so hard that he bent over, as if he was going to cough out his lungs. He could not cough out his lungs, but he could cough out blood. In just a moment, the snow-white handkerchief in his hand that covered his mouth had become dark red, as if it had been red since the beginning. In the cultivation world, the eldest brother of the academy was a legend. Few people had seen him fight, but the two world wayfarers, Yi Su and Tang, had always regarded him as their cultivation goal. It could be imagined how high his state was. However, his opponent today was the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, the Buddha in the human world, and a figure who had become a legend. After all, a legend was not a myth. It was already very incredible that the eldest brother could break the chief preaching monk's Buddhist words and force him to stay where he was, creating an opportunity for Ning-Ke to escape. However, he had not rested for a whole year. He used the limitless state to search for Ning-Ke and Sang-Sang in all the Buddhist temples, Taoist temples, and cities in the world. He was extremely tired, and his state showed signs of instability. After today's battle, he was seriously injured, and it was very likely that it would affect his future cultivation. Even so, his expression was still gentle and indifferent, and there was a purity between his eyebrows that made people want to get close to him. Except for the occasional frown when he coughed, he did not have any extra emotions. Today's battle between the leader of the Buddhism sect and Mr. First of the Academy was so magical that it was beyond description. It was absolutely qualified to be recorded in the history of cultivation or drawn into the myths of the Buddhist scriptures. Although the chief monk of scripture had suffered many setbacks, his body and mind were both indestructible, so he was not injured at all. He was still a legend and the final winner. But because Ning-Ke had successfully escaped with the daughter of Yama, he was also a loser. If it were an ordinary person, he would probably be angry and want to fight again. However, the expression on the chief preaching monk's face was as calm and gentle as that of the eldest brother, without any hint of anger. He looked at the eldest brother and praised, "Fortitude and dullness are benevolence." The eldest brother saluted back and said, "I'm ashamed to say that." The chief preaching monk thought of the most crucial scenes in today's battle and said with a smile, "Children don't talk." I should have known that the headmaster of the academy wouldn't know the old method of words come true. He looked at the eldest brother and asked, "When did the headmaster of the academy teach you the method?" The eldest brother wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and answered slowly, "The headmaster never taught me." The chief preaching monk looked at him quietly and suddenly asked, "Did you figure it out yourself?" The eldest brother nodded. The chief preaching monk's silver eyebrows fluttered slightly, and he asked, "The Buddha's words have not been heard in the world for a long time. When did you figure out?" The eldest brother answered honestly, when the master spoke the Buddha's words. After hearing the answer, the chief preaching monk was silent for a long time. His silver eyebrows slowly fell down, and he looked at the scholar and sighed, hearing Tao in the morning and knowing one's destiny in the evening. It turns out that the story is actually true. The chief preaching monk stood up with his silver cane in hand and walked slowly and heavily to the carriage. When he reached the carriage, he turned to the eldest brother and said, Ninkei and the daughter of Yama went all the way to the north. With the black crow as the guide and the dark clouds above, you can't help him anymore. Go back to the academy to rest. After a moment of silence, the eldest brother said, and the headmaster. The chief preaching monk said slowly, It is said that you, Li Man, are so kind and benevolent that you don't even know how to lie. I didn't expect that you would learn to lie for your youngest brother. Then he sighed and said, What you said on behalf of the headmaster of the academy was actually your own guess. It was not the headmaster's confirmed idea at all, so I didn't agree. The eldest brother had previously told the chief preaching monk about the headmaster's opinion. If Sang Sang died, the imprint of Yama in her body would be released, and then the location of the human world would be exposed to Yama. So she couldn't die. But now the chief preaching monk said that it was not the headmaster's opinion, but his own guess. The eldest brother's body stiffened slightly, and he didn't understand how the chief preaching monk could tell. This is the 3rd chapter. Try to finish the next chapter before 4:40. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 645. Eldest brother said, I don't understand why you would say that. The chief preaching monk looked at him and said gently, You are a student of the headmaster of the academy, so you should know his temperament. If he really thought that killing Sang Sang would lead to Yama's invasion, he would have taken Ninkei and Sang Sang back to the academy long ago. How could there be such a story from autumn to winter? Eldest senior brother remained silent. I heard that in the Lang Temple, Yisu once said that Haotian Taoism is doing the right thing, while the Buddhism sect is doing what we think we should do. Only the academy is doing what makes you happy. The chief preaching monk looked at him and said, You have no faith and no awe. Maybe you can be infinitely powerful, but if you go on like this, you may find that you don't know what makes you happy in the end. I don't know if the headmaster of the academy is happy now, but I know he is hesitating. He doesn't know what is right and what can make him happy. Please send my greetings to the headmaster of the academy when you return. Tell him that the future of the human world depends on his hesitation. After saying this, the chief preaching monk held his staff and climbed onto the carriage with difficulty. The 16 horses neighed painfully and pulled the carriage slowly out of the temple. Looking at the carriage slowly leaving, eldest brother was still silent. He thought, would the headmaster hesitate? But if the headmaster didn't hesitate, he would have done it long ago. Winter had left, but spring had not completely arrived. The plants in the low mountains in the north of the Yuelan kingdom began to turn green. But hiding among the withered branches and frost leaves, it was not pleasant enough. The scenery on both sides of the mountain road was a little desolate. It looked like monotonous moving blocks of color on the carriage window. It was not much better than the dullness of the wilderness. In the carriage, Sang Sang was wearing a fur coat and holding a thick quilt. Her face was pale, and she held a leather bag filled with liquor in her hand. When she felt cold, she would drink a few mouthfuls to warm her chest and abdomen. But she could not stop coughing. Ning Kei stared at the small medicine pot on the copper basin and carefully calculated the time. He coughed from time to time. He had basically recovered from the injury he had suffered in Chaoyang City, but there was still a small problem with his lungs. Sang Sang's arrow wound had already healed under his meticulous care. What made him uneasy now was that the cold aura in her body was showing signs of stirring again. He didn't know if it was because of the continuous escape, but the cold aura in her body showed signs of stirring again. The pungent smell of medicine gradually filled the carriage. He took down the bottle and put it on the floor to cool. Then, he took the wine bag from Sang Sang and stuffed a Buddhist scripture into her hand. I can. Sang Sang looked at him pitifully. Ninkei's heart was as hard as stone. He was unmoved and said, Master Qishan, said to read the scriptures and learn Buddhism. Even if you can recite it backwards, it is meaningless. What you need is to understand the meaning of Buddhism through reading the scriptures. Sang Sang said, I don't know if it's useful to read so many Buddhist scriptures. Hasn't it been confirmed that it worked in Chaoyang City? Ning Ke walked to the window and said, think about it. The chief preaching monk's Buddha's words are so powerful. If you can learn that move, maybe the cold aura in your body will be scared and disappear immediately with a command. Sang Sang smiled and continued to read the Buddhist scripture. Ning Ke lifted the curtain on the window and looked at the back of the mountain road. It was desolate. Evergreen pines and cypresses could be seen occasionally, but most of them were coniferous forests that had not yet sprouted new leaves. His eyes did not stay on the mountain scenery, but fell on the farther south. He wondered how eldest brother was doing now. This was the thing that worried Ning Ke the most after leaving Chaoyang City, apart from Song Song's health. He thought that since he had left with Sang Sang, the chief preaching monk had no reason to continue making things difficult for eldest brother at the risk of angering the teacher. So eldest brother should be safe. At this time, they were already hundreds of miles away from Chaoyang City. Master Chi Mei and the Yueluan Kingdom's cavalry had long been left behind. Ning Ke let the big black horse choose a side of the road and stopped to rest. Getting off the horse carriage, Ning Ke looked at the fine mountains and rivers on the side of the road with satisfaction. He patted the big black horse's back and filled the water bag. He began to stew dried meat and stuffed an old ginseng into its mouth. The big black horse chewed and swallowed the old ginseng in 2 bites. It felt a little bitter, but it knew that it was a great tonic. Naturally, it was too embarrassed to show its anger to Ning Quebec. This old ginseng and the herbs in the vat were stolen by Ning Ke from several especially luxurious mansions of princes and dukes in Chaoyang City in winter. They were all extremely precious items. The dried meat gradually became plump in the boiling water, and a smell of meat mixed with saliva overflowed the edge of the pot. The big black horse turned its head disdainfully and went to the side of the road to look for flowers to chew. It wanted to clear the bitter taste of the old ginseng in its mouth, but found that there were not even a few grasses, let alone flowers. It was very annoyed. Spending the winter in the Great Green Mountain has really turned you wild. Eating flowers is something that only people like 11th brother would do. What are you chewing on? Ning Ke reprimanded it and looked up at the sky. The dark cloud was still following Sang Sang. Compared to when they were in Chaoyang City, it was thicker and darker. It felt heavy, like an old, soaked cotton wadding. Ning Ke's mood was very heavy. The cloud made him very depressed. When he heard the cawing and saw a dozen black crows circling in the sky, he felt even more depressed and irritated. He really wanted to drive these black crows away or even kill them directly. He shot them with the boxwood bow along the way, but it had no effect. He even wanted to try using the primordial 13 arrows, but he gave up the idea in the end. He was worried that these black crows could not be killed, and he would waste his precious iron arrows. Whether it was the cloud in the sky or the annoying black crows, they all followed the black horse carriage. There was a very strange smell, and they did not leave or abandon each other. It was tiresome and frightening. Ning Ke had guessed the origin of the cloud and the black crows. The gathering might be caused by the leakage of the cold aura from Song Song's body, which affected the flow of the aura of heaven and earth. The unkillable and intelligent black crows were more likely to be condensed from the cold aura in Song Song's body. The cold aura was the imprint left by Yama in Song Song's body. The cloud and the black crows were equivalent to Yama's means. Once it involved the existence above the human world, it seemed to be understandable no matter how strange and magical it was. The black cloud and black crows followed the black horse carriage. It was a very conspicuous sign. Ning Ke did not know if Yama could see it, but after meeting the Yueluan Kingdom's cavalry, he was sure that many people had seen it. The black horse carriage could no longer hide its tracks. Ning Ke and Song Song's escape was watched by countless people, and they were forced to be above board. In this case, Ning Ke did not think too much about it. He ordered the big black horse to speed up, hoping to reach the wilderness as soon as possible. Once they entered the vast wilderness, with the big black horses' terrifying speed, it would be difficult for the cultivators of the two sects and the Uellan Kingdom's cavalry to catch up with them, unless they also had eldest brother. It didn't take long for the black horse carriage to successfully pass through the northern territory of the Uellan Kingdom. It left the border and came to the sparsely populated wilderness. It was just a simple sentence. In fact, the black horse carriage encountered many interceptions during its escape and even almost fell into a desperate situation several times. The powerhouses of the two sects and the Uellan Kingdom's military set up 4 interception lines in the north. The most dangerous one happened when the black horse carriage changed its route and tried to break through from the northeast. The West Hill Divine Palace's men in ambush in the Pamir Mountains were moving north at that time, and they encountered the black horse carriage at the northeast border of the Uellan Kingdom. There were more than a dozen deacons from the judicial department and hundreds of papal cavalrymen in the West Hill Divine Palace's team. The most terrifying thing was that there were 2 visiting professors of Haotian Taoism in the Knowing Destiny state. When Ning Ke saw the group of powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, the first thought that came to his mind was, when did the Knowing Destiny state become so common? His second thought was, how much power did Haotian Taoism hide? His third thought was, of course, to escape. Sang Sang was now the enemy of the entire world. No matter how strong Ning Ke was, he could not escape whenever he wanted to. The black horse carriage could pass through so many blockades, encounter so many powerhouses of the two sects, and still escape. It even crossed the border and successfully entered the wilderness. Other than the big black horse's incredible speed and Ning Ke's rich experience in escaping, the most important reason was that someone had been secretly helping them. Ning Ke did not know who was secretly helping him, but he could vaguely guess. His guess was only confirmed when he met the group of powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, and they were forced to show themselves. Those who had been secretly helping them escape were the people from the West Hill Divine Palace. There were deacons from the judicial department, ordinary divine priests, and 2 distinguished red-robed divine priests. In the sudden encounter at the northeast border of the Uellan Kingdom, many people had died tragically in order to protect Sang Sang. One of the red-robed divine priests had once again used divine skill to self-destruct, severely injuring the visiting professor of Haotian Taoism in the Knowing Destiny state. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been able to escape. The wind in the wilderness was still slightly cold, as one by one, the divine priests from the West Hill Divine Palace had been exposed or died in order to cover the black horse carriage's tracks. Sang Sang became more and more silent. Ning Ke lifted the curtains and looked at the familiar scenery of the wilderness that he had never seen before. He thought of the tragic scenes during their escape and said, "They are all from the Divine Hall of Light." Sang Sang softly nodded. Black-robed deacons from the judicial department, Taoist priests from a Taoist temple who had volunteered to come, ordinary divine priests, and red-robed divine priests. These people came from different places and were not all subordinates of the West Hill Divine Palace's Department of Light. But these people had one thing in common. They had all met one person before, or learned from this person, or served this person. They might even have only spoken a few words to this person. And after these experiences, no matter what these people would become in the future, the ruthless black-robed deacons from the judicial department, the visiting professor of Haotian Taoism, the distinguished red-robed divine priests, or the ordinary cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, they would always follow the light and think that they were from the Divine Hall of Light, because the person they had met was called Wei Guangming. Wei Guangming was the great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years. At the same time, he was also the biggest traitor of the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years. He was the person closest to Haotian in the eyes of the world. His only successor in the world was Sang Sang. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 646. On the West Hill Peach Mountain, the Divine Hall of Light seemed very special. It had been without a master for more than a decade, but it still had a strong hidden power. The people in the Divine Hall of Light also had a firm belief that was hard to imagine by the common people and the priests of other divine halls. This was related to the nature of the Divine Hall of Light and the history of Haotian Taoism. For countless years, the great divine priest of light seemed to always be the most special one in Haotian Taoism. It was even more so when it came to Wei Guangming. The creed of the Divine Hall of Light was that light would not make mistakes, so their belief was very firm. It pointed directly to the great divine priest and even gradually overshadowed the majesty of Haotian. Wei Guangming's imprisonment in the U prison was an unbearable humiliation for the people in the Divine Hall of Light. In addition, the West Hill Hierarch and the other two divine halls spared no effort to suppress and weaken the Divine Hall of Light, which made them extremely angry. How could they believe that the successor chosen by the great divine priest of light was the daughter of Yama? They firmly believed that Sang Sang was the Lady of Light and that the storm after the Lang Temple was just a plot by the West Hill Hierarch and the other forces of Haotian Taoism to suppress the Divine Hall of Light. They believed that it was an extremely dirty thing. In this case, how could they let the Lady of Light be imprisoned or killed? However, they were relatively weak, so they could only bear it for a long time and then suddenly exerted their strength. They came from all over the world with the sea, rain, and wind, and kept sacrificing and dying. They used their own lives and souls to escort the Black Horse carriage through the blockade of the Buddhist and Taoist sects and successfully entered the wilderness. Ninkei had no faith, so it was difficult for him to understand it. The Divine Hall of Light's strong and focused faith in Wei Guangming and Sang Sang made him even more confused and shocked. The Black Horse carriage traveled on the wilderness. He looked at the black soil melting outside the window and said, "My whole family and Darky's entire village died in the hands of your teacher. But I have to admit that your teacher is a very great person. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light founded the Enlightenment doctrine. 1,000 years later, you, the Lady of Light, became the daughter of Yama. In the intervening 1,000 years, your teacher was probably the biggest anomaly or traitor of the West Hill Divine Palace. Compared to him, Longqing was nothing." Ninkei looked at Sang Sang and said, "But I don't understand. Wei Guangming has been looking for the son of Yama all his life, and he has even killed his whole family and resorted to all kinds of means. When he died together with Master on Nameless Mountain, he had already revealed his intention of seeing through your real identity. Then why didn't he tell you? In the Lang Temple, Sang Sang's identity was exposed. There was a lot of evidence. When he mentioned this to Sang Sang later, Sang Sang told him the story on the mountain on the outskirts of Chang. Comparing the two, it could be seen that Wei Guangming already knew that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama before he died." Sang Sang shook her head and said blankly, "I don't know." Ninkei stopped thinking about this. He thought of the 4 priests in red who had self-destructed and the subordinates of the Divine Hall of Light who had died tragically. His expression turned serious, and he said, "The Divine Hall of Light will definitely be purged this time. I even suspect that this is a conspiracy of Haotian Taoism. Those bigwigs want to use the opportunity of hunting you to force the Divine Hall of Light to reveal all their hidden strength. Then they will use purging them as an excuse. If they could not return to their homeland, where could they settle down?" Sang Sang had once asked Ninkei this question. At that time, Ninkei had said that the safest place for them now was the back of the mountain of the academy, where there was no one else. The most sparsely populated place in the world was naturally the wilderness. From the Lang Temple to the western wilderness through the space passage left by Buddha, and then to Yuan, Ninkei had thought about the route to the Pamir Mountains in the east, and then to the current route. But he had never thought about going south. That was because the south of the Yuan kingdom had always been too quiet. The powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects had always stayed in the east and north of Yuan. They did not place anyone in the south, which was separated by the primeval forest from the Great River Kingdom and the South Jin Kingdom. This kind of silence was very strange. In Ninkei's eyes, it was very scary. That was why he had firmly chosen to go east and north instead of south. because although there were countless powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects in the Northeast, he could imagine how powerful they were. As for the quiet South, he did not know if it was the sword of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, or the hierarch of the Western cult who was waiting for him. What if the Abbey Dean appeared? The black horse carriage continued to move into the depths of the wilderness. After a few days, a swamp shrouded in fog appeared in front of the horse carriage. At this time, the sky was dim, so the swamp and the fog looked especially quiet and gloomy. Ning Kane knew that if he had a good view, he could see that the swamp spread to the north and south, and he could not see where the edge was. This was the quagmire. It was a very ordinary and even petty name, but it was the largest wetland swamp in the world. The wilderness where the Xiankong Temple and the Right King's Palace were located was called the West Wilderness. To the east was the Great Wilderness where the Golden Palace was located, and this swamp was between the West Wilderness and the Great Wilderness. It was like the vast Min Mountain, which naturally separated the two wilderness. If one wanted to go to the Golden Palace, then he had to pass through this swamp. The black crows circled above the horse carriage, cawing from time to time. They had accompanied them for too long, and Ning Ke was already used to it. Anyway, he could not do anything to these black crows, and he could only pretend that he did not see them. The black crows became bolder and bolder, and at this time, 2 of them even landed on the horse carriage. The swamp was very dangerous. The fog lingered all year round, and it was very easy to get lost. In the mud, covered with shallow water and grass, there were many hidden pools that could devour people. Even Ning Ke did not have full confidence to walk out. The black horse carriage stopped at the edge of the swamp and rested for a while. Ning Ke made some simple but high-calorie food and ate it with Sang Sang and the big black horse. He also decocted medicine for Sang Sang to drink and then stood on the roof of the horse carriage to explore the way. 2 black crows squatted at his feet and looked up at the iron cylinder-like thing between his hands. They cawed, as if they wanted to ask him what it was. Ning Ke was a little annoyed by the crows cawing. He stretched out his feet to chase the 2 black crows away and then jumped off the roof. He walked to the window and handed the binoculars to Sang Sang, looking a little uneasy. "Can't you see the way?" Sang Sang asked. Ning Ke nodded and said, "The fog in the swamp is too thick, and I can't see the gravel path that the herdsman mentioned before. There's a talisman array in the horse carriage, so I'm not worried. I'm just worried that the big black horse will fall into it." The big black horse softly neighed when heard that. Sang Sang walked down with the big black umbrella. Ning Ke guessed what she was going to do and shook his head disapprovingly. He said, "I told you not to use the black umbrella, and your body is so weak now. I used it in Chaoyang City, and I didn't feel anything happened. If Yama really used the black umbrella to find me, why haven't I seen him for so many years?" Sang Sang said with a smile. Seeing that he still did not agree, she led the big black horse, stepped on the saddle, stepped on the horse's back, and then climbed to the roof of the carriage. She crossed her hands and opened the big black umbrella. At the edge of the swamp, a black flower bloomed on the roof of the carriage. After a long time, Sang Sang motioned for Ning Ke to carry her down. Ning Ke noticed that her face became paler, but her body temperature was still normal, so he was a little relieved. "The swamp is too deep, and I can't see far. But there are indeed gravel paths, but they're covered by mud and water plants, so it's hard to find them. Besides, Master Chi Mei and the others are only 30 miles away from us." After saying this, Sang Sang rubbed her slightly painful eyebrows. She suddenly felt annoyed in her chest and abdomen, and coughed repeatedly. What made people feel helpless was that what she coughed up was not blood, but some black foam. Ning Ke took out a handkerchief and wiped the black foam off the corner of her mouth. He found that the black foam looked very clean and did not smell fishy. It even had a faint, sweet smell. He smiled and said, "It really looks like black sesame paste." Sang Sang frowned slightly and said uncomfortably, "It's too disgusting. According to common sense, swamps and wetlands should only appear in hot and humid areas in the south. This place was deep in the wilderness, and it was cold and short of water all day long. There should not be any swamps at all. However, the quagmire was really strange. There were countless geothermal sources under the wilderness. For tens of thousands of years, they constantly spewed hot spring steam to the surface of the wilderness. It never froze all year round, which was why there was such a large swamp. It would not freeze even in the cold winter, and there would only be a thin layer of frost on the surface of the swamp. It was almost spring now, and the hot springs quietly flowed and spread. The thin frost had all melted, and the swamp became even more muddy. The big black horse's front hooves all sank into the wet mud of the swamp, and there was a smacking sound. Its chest was touching the ground, and it looked extremely dangerous. However, it was just bored and put its head in the mud, as if it was resting. Ning-Ke stepped on two large pieces of iron and walked to its side. He reached out and grabbed the reins. He activated the Great Spirit slightly, and a strong force appeared in his right arm, and he forcibly lifted it out of the wet mud. The big black horse hurriedly turned to the side and finally walked to a slightly firmer ground. It kept shaking its head, but the mud on its head could not be shaken off no matter how hard it tried, and it looked very embarrassed. Song Song's body was slightly better. The water vapor in the swamp was rising, and the temperature was not low, so she had been sitting on the shaft of the carriage to relax. Looking at this scene, she could not help but laugh. At this time, they had already reached the depths of the swamp known as the quagmire, and there were no longer any pursuers behind them. What they had to resist now was not the human world, but nature. The ground of the swamp was extremely soft, and it was difficult for plants to grow in the water that was rich in sulfur and other things. There was only endless wild moss, which made it even more slippery to walk, and it was easy for them to sink into the dark pool. For ordinary people, this swamp was equivalent to a dangerous place. Although Ning-Ke and his group were not worried about being swallowed by the swamp, it was still extremely difficult to walk. They often could not find the pebbles that the herdsman had mentioned under the moss, and they had to wade through the mud, which made their speed very slow. Fortunately, the talisman array made the carriage as light as a feather. Otherwise, they would not be able to walk more than 2 miles in this swamp. There were a few times when they encountered a large area of water, and they really could not find a way through. Ning-Ke had to spend a lot of psyche power to stick several wind talismans on the big black horse, and they finally got through the difficulties. I'm getting more and more tired, and it's getting later and later. I'm really sorry, but there are at least 2 more chapters today. Keep working hard. I have something to report to everyone. There are only 2 days left in this month, and there is still half an hour left. Qi can only vote twice a day, so if you have more than 2 votes, you have to vote now. Otherwise, it will be a pity if you can't vote tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 647. A difficult and dangerous place like the quagmire was more inaccessible, which meant it was safer. That was what Ning-Ke thought, and so did many animals. The lake emitted a faint smell of sulfur and could not grow any big plants, but the moss could be eaten and the heat could avoid the winter. So many animals live in the swamp all year round. Their main food was moss or plankton in the water. There were no lions or tigers in the swamp, but there was a fierce beast that looked like a snake and was covered with light, greasy hair. This fierce beast was called the capybara by the herdsmen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It moved extremely fast, and its saliva was slightly poisonous. It lived on carrion, and most of the horses and sheep that got lost in the swamp were killed by this fierce beast. Ning-Ke was naturally not afraid of this capybara. The capybara seemed to be able to sense his dangerous aura and would avoid him every time they met. But a few days ago, a capybara finally could not resist the temptation of the big black horse and wanted to taste the horse's meat. It hid under the water plants and launched a sneak attack on the big black horse. The big black horse bit the capybara to death and stomped it with its front hooves in disdain. Then it lowered its head and licked it. It tasted terrible and did not eat it. The fog in the quagmire became thicker and thicker. They could no longer see the thick dark cloud. Although they knew that the cloud was still floating above the horse carriage, both Ning-Ke and Sang Sang felt much more comfortable. They continued to walk deeper into the swamp and estimated that it would take them 2 or 3 days to get out of the swamp. The black horse carriage came to a pond, and Ning K suddenly felt his eyes light up. The terrain here was relatively low, and the water in the pool was about half a person's height. Compared to other parts of the swamp, it was much clearer. Perhaps because of the source, the water here could be drunk directly. The water in the pool was lush, and there were many small silver fish swimming among the water plants. There were also more than 10 white water birds drinking by the side of the pool. If eldest brother saw this place, he would be very happy. Ning Ke walked to the pond, and his eyes, which had been tortured by the desolation and the swamp for many days, were suddenly refreshed by the lake. He reached into the pond and found that the temperature was just right. Then he let Sang Sang take a bath. The big black horse was chased to another pond. It rushed into the pond, neighing happily and shaking its head to wash off the mud on its body. It began to stare at the silver fish swimming in the water and drool. Sang Sang took off her heavy fur coat and the thin shirt inside and walked into the pool. She shivered a little when the breeze blew over the surface of the pool. She hugged herself with both hands, feeling a little cold. Sit in the water, and it will be warm. Ning Ke walked behind her with a towel and prepared to rub her back. Sang Sang obeyed. Her body slowly sank until her head was submerged in the warm water. Then she stood up again. Her wet short hair looked very smooth, and the ends of her hair dripped water on her thin shoulders. When they were young, Ning Ke often bathed Sang Sang. When they grew up, Sang Sang insisted on bathing herself, but insisted on scrubbing his back. Later, Song Song's illness worsened, and Ning Ke began to bathe her again. They had lived together for too many years. No matter body or soul, there were not many secrets between them. Moreover, they were already engaged, so Sang Sang would not be shy, and Ning Ke would not be embarrassed. However, the girl's body was still young, but the lines were already soft and beautiful. Sang Sang had grown up after all. Ning Ke gently rubbed his hands on her back, and after a while, he naturally reached to the front and held her. Sang Sang said softly, "Is it too small?" Ning Ke said, "It's not small anymore." He did not know if they were talking about the same thing. Sang Sang suddenly coughed. Ning Ke calmed himself down and began to scrub her back seriously. In the shortest time possible, he finished the bath and carried her back to the horse carriage. He dried her body and put on his clothes. He also hurriedly took a bath and changed into a new set of clothes. Then he sat on the grass by the pond and held her in his arms to enjoy the scenery. Seeing her slightly wet hair, he thought of some past events and smiled. Sang Sang always knew what he was thinking about. Even if she did not, she at least knew what he was thinking about. She moved her body backward and hid her whole body in his arms. She asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about Shan Shan," Ning Ke said honestly. "When I first saw her outside the north wall of the Yin Kingdom, it was also beside the hot spring. She stood on a tree, and her hair seemed to be wet too." Sang Sang leaned on him lazily and thought of something. She said worriedly, "Miss Shan Shan helped us in the Lang Temple. Will we cause any trouble for her?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Her teacher, the master of calligrapher, is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism. She is a divine talisman master herself, so both the Buddhist and Taoist sects have to give her some face. Moreover, eldest brother has already taken her as his sworn sister, so it should be fine." The big black horse had also finished bathing and ran back happily. He approached the two and wanted to act coquettishly. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, Ning Ke smelled a strong, fishy smell. He could not help but say angrily, "Are you a fool or a foodie? You didn't forget to eat fish even after bathing. Hurry up and go back." The big black horse walked away angrily and lay down by the pool. He basked in the sun that did not exist and was blown by the warm wind. He gradually felt better and snorted happily from time to time. The fog was like smoke, and the clear pool was like a piece of excellent but very light jade. The green grass beside the pool was like a carpet, and the fish in the pool was startled, but the grass was not disturbed. Ning Ke held Sang Sang and looked at the beautiful scenery. Because of the relaxation, he gradually felt tired and fell asleep. No one knew how long it had been. There was no wind, and the fog gradually dissipated. On the other side of the quiet pool, a faint shadow appeared. Ninkei opened his eyes and looked in that direction. Only then did he realize that the pool was actually larger than he had imagined. The other side of the pool was at least 1,000 feet away from his side. He saw the shadow, but was not vigilant. Because if the shadow was a person or a beast, it would not be able to hide from his and Song Song's perception. They thought it was a tree. The fog around the swamp became thinner and thinner, and the fog around the pool gradually dissipated. They could already see the thick, dark clouds above and the scenery on the other side. The shadow on the other side of the pool was not a tree, but a person that Ninkei and Sang Sang could not perceive. It was a beautiful woman. Even from such a distance, they could still feel the charming aura exuding from her body. However, the aura was filtered by the bloody robe on her body and turned into a murderous and terrifying aura. There was no blood on the bloody robe. The robe of judgment was originally blood red. It was usually spotless, but now there were many mud spots on it. However, the woman under the robe still gave people a feeling of being out of this world. The woman was wearing a divine crown. The divine crown was made of gold, with mithril as the thread, and was inlaid with 13 bright gems. It was as if there was a curtain of light hanging down from the edge of the crown and covering her face. It was so luxurious and beautiful that people could not look at it directly. Ninkei knew that the divine crown was very precious because he had held it in the kingdom temple of the kingdom of Qi. However, he did not know that he would see this divine crown and this blood-red robe on his escape. But the moment he saw her, he understood that it was a matter of course. It was a big deal to kill the daughter of Yama in the human world. The Buddhism sect had even invited the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple. As the servants of Haotian Taoism would definitely take action. The powerhouses from Haotian Taoism and Luo Kadi who were lying in ambush in the Pamir Mountains seemed very powerful, but in fact they were not enough. Even though the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey was far away in the Nanyang, the West Hill Divine Palace should at least send a great divine priest. The West Hill Divine Palace invited the great divine priest was her. Ninkei felt very lucky, but also very unlucky. He looked at the woman on the other side of the pool and did not know what to do except to remain silent. After a long period of silence, absolute silence, the atmosphere around the pool became very heavy and oppressive. The small silver fishes swam into the depths of the water plants in groups, and the dozens of white water birds flew away in fear. Perhaps the fog had predicted what was going to happen here in advance, so it escaped in advance. Ninkei suddenly laughed and waved to the opposite side. He said, "What a coincidence to meet here." Yihong Yu said, "I waited in the mud for dozens of days and finally met you and her. Don't you think it's a coincidence?" Ninkei smiled and said, "Why do you have to make the atmosphere so serious? Speaking of which, didn't we have a good chat when we met in the kingdom of Qi a few months ago?" Yihong Yu said, "First of all, she was not the child of Yama at that time. Second, it has been more than a year since we last met, not just a few months." After a short pause, she continued, "It seems that Buddha's chessboard really saved you." Ninkei said, "You waited for dozens of days just to hear the story of our escape from the Lank Temple." Yihong Yu said, "I waited for someone to kill someone." With that, she walked to the other side of the pool, her blood-red robe fluttering. Ninkei shouted, "If you don't want to hear the story of our escape, I can still tell you the story of the Xiankong Temple. It's quite interesting." Yihong Yu acted as if she did not hear him. Her footsteps were slow and steady. Ninkei pretended to be angry and said, "This is what I dislike most about you. You always want to fight and kill." Yihong Yu frowned slightly and stopped. She said, "I don't need your love." Ninkei said angrily, "I am such an excellent man. What's wrong with me?" Yihong Yu said, "You even dared to marry the daughter of Yama. Men like you are so bold that even I'm a little surprised. So it's better to kill rather than love." Ninkei said, "This means that you might still like me." Yihong Yu knew what kind of person he was. She ignored him and continued forward. Ninkei's expression was calm, but his body was getting colder. He said, "You actually waited for us in this muddy pond for so many days. How can I repay your kindness? I want to ask you to take a bath." Yi Hongyu did not stop and said, "It's not easy to kill you, so I will definitely be stained with mud and your blood. I will wash later." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I don't fight with women covered in mud. No matter what kind of fight it is, I will touch a handful of mud and smell no fragrance. It won't be fun." Yi Hongyu's expression was slightly cold. She said, "It's very perverted to like to kill women." Ning Ke stood up and looked at her calmly. He said, "You should know very well that we are all perverts. Also, try to finish writing before 4:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come at Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 648. I can't repay you for your kindness. Please take a bath. No matter who it was that said this, it would be very strange, let alone a beauty wearing a judgment god's robe. However, no one, including Ning Ke, could have expected what happened next. Perverts are abnormal. This should be a compliment. The frost on Yi Hongyu's face gradually dissipated and was replaced by a faint smile. She reached into her collar and began to take off the divine robe. Her slender fingers moved slightly, and the thin blood-colored divine robe flew with the wind, revealing her fair body. On the other side of the pool, Ning Ke and Sang Sang were stunned. Yi Hongyu did not care about their gazes. She did not hide anything and walked naked into the clear water under the clouds and in the swamp. Then, she began to wash her long black hair. Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at the perfect body in the pool. Looking at the graceful and charming curves, they were even more stunned. They did not know what to say or if they should stop her. After a while, Sang Sang looked at the woman in the water and sighed, "So beautiful." Ning Ke stared at her and nodded, "Really beautiful." Yi Hongyu's appearance in front of the black horse carriage was not a coincidence, as Ning Ke had said. The dark cloud and a dozen black crows had been following them, but not many dared to enter the quagmire to search. However, Yi Hongyu had waited alone in the swamp for dozens of days. There was no reason that she could not find them. She did not care that her body was seen by Sang Sang, especially Ning Ke, not to seduce them. Ning Ke thought of the two divine lights in her eyes on the stone steps of the kingdom of Qi and vaguely understood the reason. Those who sat on the divine throne paid more attention to spiritual cultivation and pursued the state of unhindered Taoist heart. To Yi Hongyu now, no matter how perfect and attractive her body was, it was just an annoying shell. She could not wait to throw this shell into the trash, so why would she care about being seen by others? Ning Ke suddenly asked, "How did you know that I would go this way?" Yi Hongyu took out a comb from somewhere and gently combed her hair while standing in the water. The water was up to her waist, and her black hair was wet and fell on her bare chest. It was a beautiful scene. "You just said that we are all perverts. I know you very well. With your character, whether you want to return to the Tang Empire or go to the wilderness like that idiot Long Qing, you will choose to cross the quagmire." Ning Ke said, "The quagmire is not a real pond. This swamp is huge. Aren't you afraid of missing it?" Yi Hongyu continued, combing her hair, and looked at the black crow on top of the black horse carriage. She said calmly, "Hao Yanzi will not let me miss you." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke asked solemnly, "Must I?" "You must." Yi Hongyu combed her wet hair to the top of her head and tied it into a simple bun. Water dripped from her hair and fell into the pool, making a monotonous sound, just like her voice at that moment. "As the adjudicator, my mission is to judge the sins and evils of the world on behalf of Hao Yin." Ning Ke said, "But we are not guilty." Yi Hongyu said, "It was already beyond my expectations that you could escape from Chaoyang City. It is not hard to imagine that you have killed many people in the process." Ning Ke said, "If others want to kill me, I will kill them." Yi Hongyu said, "If you don't care about her, who would dare to kill you?" Ning Ke said, "Idiot, she is my wife." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and asked, "Even if your wife is the daughter of Yama?" Ning Ke said, "Even if she is the daughter of Yama, she has never done evil." Yi Hongyu said, I heard that Mr. Fur said the same thing in the Lang Temple. It seems that everyone on the second floor of the academy is like this. Don't you think it is hypocritical? Ning Ke said, All right, I am not the eldest brother. It is not convincing for me to say such things. But she is still my wife. Even if she is guilty of many crimes, can I not care about her? That makes sense. But this is your reasoning as a man, not the reasoning of the human world. Sacrificing one person to save the whole world. Is this the reasoning of the human world? I believe that both the chief preaching monk and Master Chi Mei are willing to die with Sang Sang. But you're not such a person. Yi Hongyu said, That is right. My existence is the most important thing. Whether your wife dies or not is not enough for me to die with her. If the underworld really invades in the future, I will fight with Yama before I die. My life will not be in vain. But this does not affect me from trying to kill her. Why? She is the daughter of Yama. This is the original sin. There is no original sin. It is only about interests. It involves the interests of most people and the whole of the human world. So in your eyes, this is an unforgivable sin. Do you only understand now what is good and evil, and what is merit and sin? In the first place, this has nothing to do with morality and morality. It's only about benefits. If it's beneficial to the world, it's good, and if it's not beneficial, it's evil. If it's beneficial to more people, it's great good, and if it's not beneficial to more people, it's evil. But now that you are the great divine priest of West Hill, you do not have to follow this rule. That is right. We are the people who make the rules. We are the shepherds. But when someone threatens the sheep or even the whole grassland, we will also follow this rule. If so, how can Haotian Taoism say that the academy is hypocritical? Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly, Haotian Taoism is hypocritical. I have never denied that. But the academy always thinks that you are not hypocritical. That is why I say that you are hypocritical. Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly said, Herding sheep for 10,000 years and eating mutton in different ways, you will always get tired of it. Have you ever thought of changing your way of life? For example, hunting in the mountains. Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and did not speak. Ning Ke said again, The underworld invasion must be a spectacular scene. For countless years, only our generation has the chance to see it. Don't you want to see the everlasting night coming to the human world? Yi Hongyu said, I want to see it, but I cannot go against Haotian's will. Ning Ke said, Please, you have never heard Haotian speak. Maybe he has been lonely in heaven for tens of thousands of years, hoping that Yama will find this place and fight with him. If you kill me and Sang Sang, Yama will never find the human world. Haotian will die alone and suffer more than a bitter gourd. He knew that the woman in the pond was very scary. The scariest thing was that they were the same kind of people, but Yi Hongyu's cultivation state was always higher than his. In other words, Ning Ke could only fight with her, but he could not defeat her. He would rather fight with Master Chi Mei 3 more times, or even face the chief preaching monk again, than fight with her. So he had been trying to persuade her to let him and Sang Sang go. The conversation between the two was very fast, and it seemed that they did not go through deep thinking. In fact, it was very exhausting. It was the most complicated and wonderful persuasion he had ever done in his life. Yi Hongyu's attitude obviously changed twice, and she was almost convinced by him. But he did not succeed in the end. Yi Hongyu walked to the shore, and water droplets slid down her smooth body. Since you are sure that you don't want Yama to find the human world, then you can't kill Sang Sang. Ning Ke stared at her naked back, and his eyes brightened without any frustration. He continued, The headmaster said that if anything happens to Sang Sang, the imprint in her body will be released, and Yama will know the location of the human world. Yi Hongyu gently wiped her body, and without turning around, she said directly, The headmaster would not say that. Ning Ke said, This is what the headmaster asked eldest brother to tell the chief preaching monk. Yi Hongyu began to put on her clothes. The process of putting on clothes, which would have been embarrassing for ordinary beauties, was still pleasing to the eye. If this was really the headmaster's idea, he would have brought you and Sang Sang back to the academy or to the ends of the earth. Why would Mr. First need to run around so tirelessly? Ning Ke did not know that after he left Chuyang City, eldest brother and the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple had a similar conversation in the White Tower Temple. The chief preaching monk's idea was exactly the same as Yi Hongyu's. When he heard Yi Hongyu's deduction, he could not help but tremble slightly. He had always thought that this was really the headmaster's idea, and he had always regarded it as Song Song's last hope. The blood-red divine robe covered with mud returned to Yi Hongyu's body, and the heavy divine crown fell slowly. The beautiful girl who was playing in the pool in the wild suddenly turned back into the terrifying great divine priest of judgment. The black crow caught on top of the horse carriage. It was unpleasant and ominous. Ning Ke's expression was extremely ugly, and he shouted, "Shut up." The black crow was quiet for a moment, and then it began to caw again. Ning Ke laughed at himself, shook his head, and ignored it. He held Sang Sang in his arms and looked up at the thick dark clouds in the sky with a trace of sadness on his face. This sadness was very faint, and it was very real. It was definitely not faked. Yi Hongyu looked at the other side of the river quietly and felt his real fatigue, sadness, and confusion. She subconsciously felt some sympathy and looked up at the dark clouds in the sky. However, the moment she looked up, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. It was not a warning. Her Taoist heart did not give any warning, which meant that everything was normal. However, there was still something wrong. She suddenly thought that a person like Ning Ke might be sad, but he should not be before the battle, because any extra emotions would not be good for the battle. He should know this very well. The most important thing was his self-deprecating smile. Even if he had experienced too many things in the past 2 years, and he could not suppress his emotions, he should not laugh at himself. Because when self-deprecating smile and sadness were combined, it would mean that he had given up. Yi Hongyu firmly believed that she would not be depressed no matter what situation she faced. No matter how strong the enemy was, she would not give up until the end of the battle, and he would not give up either. This was what was wrong. Yi Hongyu looked away. She looked at the other side of the river. An iron bow appeared in Ning Ke's hands, which had been empty all this time. The bowstring was already taut, and it was suddenly loosening. The dark iron arrow had just left the bowstring, and a white turbulence was forming at the end of the arrow. Behind the iron bow, Ning Ke's calm face looked extremely cold. Yi Hongyu knew that death would come soon, and it was even destined to come. At this moment, she finally understood that what Ning Ke had been doing was not the most exhausting, complicated, and exciting persuasion in his life. It was the most exhausting, complicated, and exciting arrow in his life. This chapter is well written. See you all tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 649. In the face of death, Yi Hongyu's pupils did not shrink, nor did she scream. Whether it was the shrinking of her pupils or the vibration of her vocal cords, it all required strength and time, and it was meaningless. She knelt down towards the other side of the pool. When her knees bent slightly, the iron arrow was already in front of her. She was the Tao addict who knew everything. However, she could not find a method faster than the iron arrow among the thousands of methods. At this moment, her eyes suddenly brightened. In the depths of her eyes, the divine starlight that Ning Ke had seen before burned, as if her soul was burning like firewood. The 2 balls of burning divine starlight shot out from her eyes and became 2 extremely bright mirrors of light. The dark iron arrow hit the mirror, and it suddenly broke, turning into countless floating sequins. The gorgeous divine crown broke, and the 13 bright gems were shaken into powder. The golden crown bloomed like a chrysanthemum in autumn, turning into countless dense silk petals, and then dispersed. Yi Hongyu knelt on the wetland by the shore. Blood flowed from her temples and flowed down her cheeks, dripping in front of her. She looked very embarrassed and even a little pitiful. Her injuries looked terrible on the surface, but the real serious injury was inside her body. In order to find a chance of survival under the iron arrow, the divine starlight in her eyes burned out. The divine starlight, after becoming the great divine priest, was used up just like that. The price she paid could be said to be heavy, and her Taoist heart was seriously damaged. She had seriously injured the great divine priest of judgment of the West Hill Divine Palace the first time she attacked. No matter how one looked at it, it was something to be proud of. Even second brother Jun Mo will be satisfied with it. But Ning Ke was not satisfied. He looked at Yi Hong Yu, who was covered in blood, on the other side of the pool. He was even very disappointed and regretful, because he knew that he could no longer attack like the first time. Understanding and understanding were not only used to describe lovers. It could also be used to describe two very similar enemies, such as him and Yi Hong Yu. Ning Ke was very clear that if he wanted to defeat Yi Hong Yu, the fighting methods that he was good at would not be effective. Psychological attacks, such as showing weakness or intimacy, were even more meaningless. So he did not show weakness, nor did he really beg for mercy. He calmly used the shameless attitude that Yi Hong Yu was very used to reason and persuade her as an equal. Those words were not psychological attacks, but they were also psychological attacks. He wanted Yi Hong Yu to see him as a kindred spirit, a person who was qualified to discuss with her, and then she would feel the same way. When he looked up at the sky with Sang Sang in his arms, he could temporarily make a loophole in Yi Hong Yu's mind. That loophole really appeared, but it was still very difficult to take it. In Chaoyang City, he shot at Luo Kadi through the courtyard door. Luo would be alarmed, let alone Yi Hong Yu. Therefore, when Yi Hong Yu looked up at the dark clouds in the sky, Ning Ke calmed himself down with Zen and drew the bow with the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect that he had comprehended in the Lang Temple. His movements were extremely casual, as if he was washing Song Song's feet or writing with a pen. It was extremely ordinary. There was no killing intent, so naturally there was no leakage of killing intent. Sang Sang had already prepared the iron bow and iron arrows for him. Ning Ke had spent so much effort and made so many preparations, but nothing went wrong. Ning Ke's arrow was extremely brilliant. Anyone would have been fooled by him and then shot to death. However, Yi Hong Yu was only seriously injured but not dead. Therefore, he felt very regretful. Then, he drew his bow again and prepared to shoot again. Dark blood flowed from the corner of Yi Hong Yu's lips. She stood up and looked at Ning Ke on the other side of the pool. Although the divine starlight in the depths of her eyes had been extinguished, her eyes were still extremely bright. There was no anger in them, only indifference. His blood-stained black hair and blood-red divine robe fluttered even though there was no wind. Ning Ke pulled the bow and aimed at her body, but found that he could not aim at her at all. That was because the dancing black hair and the thin and fluttering divine robe created countless shadows in the air. He did not know which shadow was the real one. Yi Hong Yu stepped on the surface of the water and swept over. Her black hair and divine robe fluttered even more wildly, leaving many shadows behind. Her movements were extremely graceful and ethereal, as if she was a fairy. At this time, the fog on the surface of the pool had long dissipated, and the field of vision was wide and clear. But when she appeared on the surface of the water, all the light in the world seemed to be absorbed by her and suddenly became dim and blurry. Perhaps it was because of the terrifying power of the iron bow in Ning Ke's hands. She did not choose to attack directly. Instead, she danced on the surface of the pool, using the shadows and the aura of heaven and earth to hide her real whereabouts. Ning Ke looked at the front of the arrowhead. His arms were as steady as a mountain, and he kept changing directions. He stared at the charming figure that moved forward and backward on the surface of the pool, not daring to relax at all. The situation seemed to be in a stalemate, but he knew that he was in a very disadvantageous position because he could not lock onto her position. After aiming for a long time, he felt that his sense of perception was being dragged by the shadows of Yi Hong Yu's black hair and blood-red robe. His chest and abdomen were uncomfortable, and his face gradually turned pale. After entering the knowing destiny state, one could truly understand and master the rules of the circulation of the qi of heaven and earth. He could clearly feel that Yi Hong Yu's body seemed to have melted into the aura of heaven and earth on the surface of the pool, like a fish in the water regaining its freedom. There was no way to lock it, so he could not shoot the arrow. Yi Hong Yu, you are indeed powerful to be able to break my primordial 13 arrows in one move. Ning Ke thought to himself as he aimed at the figure on the surface of the water. The situation was very clear, so there was no need to waste his efforts. Without hesitation, he let go of the iron bow in his hand and reached out to grab the hilt of his knife, pulling out the heavy padao. Yi Hong Yu had been waiting for the moment when he abandoned the bow and pulled out his knife. Her charming figure appeared, and a few ripples appeared on the surface of the water. Countless tiny water swords appeared from the pool and stabbed at Ning Ke's body like raindrops. Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella. Ning Ke did not stand in the big black umbrella. He had been waiting for the moment when Yi Hong Yu pulled out her sword. His face instantly became even paler, and his body trembled violently. His left hand drew 2 straight lines in the air in front of him. However, he dragged the padao and rushed into the pool like lightning, splashing water everywhere. The water swords that were as fine as needles fell on Ning Ke's body. Most of them turned into water droplets and soaked his clothes. Occasionally, a dozen extremely fine water swords pierced into his body, ignoring his hard skin and causing streaks of blood. However, those streaks of blood were immediately washed away by the water behind them. As long as they were thin enough, they could produce enough penetrating power. It was obvious that Yi Hong Yu had been prepared for Ning Ke's strong body after cultivating the Great Spirit. Ning Ke could clearly feel the pain and stab wounds caused by the fine water swords in his muscles. However, his face showed no expression and he continued to rush forward. Water splashed everywhere on the surface of the pool. The white waves mixed with the black mud of the pool, like a multicolored giant serpent. He was the most dangerous part of the giant serpent, and he directly crashed into Yi Hong Yu. In front of him, 2 extremely sharp and unstoppable invisible talisman appeared in the sky above the pool, locking Yi Hong Yu in an extremely small area. It was his most powerful 2 horizontal talisman. There's only 1 hour left for this month. Everyone, do you still have monthly votes? I will continue to write. There are still 2 chapters left today. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 650. Standing on the ground, the 2 barely discernible talisman lines were absolutely straight lines. However, if one looked down from the dark clouds in the sky, they would see that the 2 talisman lines had bent and were about to become 2 overlapping circles, trapping the bloodied Yi Hong Yu in the middle. The 2 horizontal talisman was Ning Ke's strongest move apart from the primordial 13 arrows. It had appeared for the first time in the Lang Temple, and even Yi Su and Qin Yin did not dare to underestimate it. No matter how strong Yi Hong Yu was, she had to be vigilant. At this moment, there was the sky above her head and the pond water and mud below her. Between the sky and the ground were the 2 terrifying talisman intents. It seemed that there was no way for her to escape, nor could she avoid Ning Ke's lightning-like padao. Yi Hong Yu dived into the pond without hesitation, just like how she chose to kneel on the other side of the pond without hesitation. She never cared about manners when she fought. She would forget that she was the noble, great divine priest of West Hill, forget that she was a woman, and even forget who she was. She did not care about embarrassment or humiliation, as long as she could obtain the final victory. Diving into the pond was actually a risk, because the water was already muddy and stagnant, which would affect the battle greatly. However, she swam so nimbly in the pond. Her blood-colored divine robe stuck tightly to her charming body after coming into contact with the water, as if she had become a real red fish. She was about to pass through the 2 talisman lines in an instant. Looking at the red fish in the pond, Ning Ke's face did not show any surprise, because he had already guessed Yi Hong Yu's response. He paused and raised his padao with both hands. Before the padao fell, there were suddenly many blood-colored currents in the pond. The talisman intent of the 2 horizontal talisman permeated the pond water and cut at least dozens of small wounds on her body. The pond water swayed, and the talisman intent was so strong that Yi Hong Yu could not move forward. Water splashed like white peonies, and her figure emerged from the waves. She used her fingers as a sword and stabbed towards Ning Kei's brows. What a piercingly cold aura of the Taoist sword. Ning Kei raised his padao with both hands and chopped towards the waves. The padao momentum was heavy and unstoppable. He suddenly felt the aura of the Taoist sword, but he did not stop. Yi Hong Yu looked at the padao that was slashing towards her without any emotion on her face. The Taoist sword, formed by 2 fingers on her right hand, was still stabbing forward steadily, as if she did not care about her own life or death. At this moment, if neither of them were willing to stop, then Ning Kei's saber would cut Yi Hong Yu into 2 pieces, and Yi Hong Yu's finger sword would pierce through Ning Kei's ocean of qi. He would either die or become a fool. The saber was still falling, and the finger was still pointing forward, carrying with it an awe-inspiring force of mutual destruction, as well as a ruthless intent of mutual destruction. Ning Kei and Yi Hong Yu were both gambling. He was betting his own life, betting the other party's life. He was betting on whether or not the other party treasured his life. Both of them looked extremely indifferent. In Yi Hong Yu's words, there were only 2 people in the cultivation world who truly understood what a battle was. One was herself, and the other was Ning Quebec. The 2 of them were too good at fighting. Their lives were filled with endless life and death battles, so they had almost identical mental qualities and equally strong fighting wills. At this moment, they had finally reached the critical moment of life and death, but they did not know who was more ruthless to themselves, and who was more familiar and indifferent to life and death. If Ning Kei was alone, he would not retreat. His state of strength was not as good as Yi Hong Yu's. Today he had used the iron arrow to ambush her, forced her into such a difficult situation, and forced her to gamble with her life. In the face of such a rare opportunity, he was very willing to gamble with his life for Yi Hong Yu's, even if there was a high possibility that both of them would die. However, Sang Sang was standing on the shore behind him. She was seriously ill and weak, and the whole world was chasing after her. If he died, then she would die too, so he cannot die. Looking at Yi Hong Yu's calm and indifferent eyes under the blade, Ning Kei confirmed that although she was the great divine priest of judgment, she could still die at any time, because she was alone. Then he had to retreat. Ning Kei suddenly withdrew his saber and blocked in front of his lower abdomen. Yi Hong Yu's finger sword was clearly aimed at the space between his eyebrows, but for some reason, he thought that Yi Hong Yu was aiming at his lower abdomen. This was purely an intuition that had been cultivated through countless battles. He came to this conclusion without thinking. Yi Hong Yu broke through the waves of the pool. Her body was relatively low, and her finger sword was indeed aimed at Ning Kei's lower abdomen. It stabbed heavily on the thick surface of the padao, making a muffled sound. A faint light appeared on the surface of the padao. It was an external sign that the aura of heaven and earth had condensed to the extreme. Ning Kei's wrist was heavily injured, and he felt a tightness in his chest. Just as Yi Hong Yu's finger sword stabbed the surface of the padao, a transparent Taoist sword condensed from the lake water quietly floated up from behind her and stabbed into Ning Kei's left chest with a swoosh. Ning Kei let out a muffled groan, and the great spirit in his body surged out, covering his chest and abdomen. It shook the Taoist sword condensed from the lake water into raindrops. His body suddenly flew backward, and he spat out several mouthfuls of blood in the air. He fell heavily to the ground, and there was an extremely deep bloody hole in his left chest. If his body had not been unusually strong after being tempered by the Great Spirit, his heart would definitely have been pierced by this sword. Yi Hong Yu stood on a water plant in the pool. There were dozens of wounds on her body, and they kept oozing blood. In an instant, the blood soaked her blood-red, divine robe again, and then dripped into the pool under her feet. The clear light shone from behind her, and through the thin and wet divine robe, there was no sense of charm. Instead, it was exceptionally dignified. She was already the great divine priest of judgment, and was no longer the Tao addict who lived by the Yenming Lake. Ning Ke pressed the bloody hole in his chest with his hand and looked at the woman on the surface of the lake. His body felt a little cold. He had only been in the knowing destiny state for half a year, and his state was not stable. If they were to fight face to face, he would not be a match for Master Chi Mei of the Shinkan Temple, or even Luo Kadi. It was only because he had the primordial 13 arrows and the divine talisman that he could use to kill people of a higher state. Moreover, he was good at fighting and used to sneak attacks. That was why he had such achievements. Today, facing Yi Hongyu, who was also good at fighting, was not ashamed of sneak attacks and was more unscrupulous than him. Moreover, her state was higher than his. Therefore, the methods he used to win were meaningless. Looking at Yi Hongyu, who was walking to the shore, he suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Yi Hongyu obeyed and put her hands behind her back, but she did not stop in the water. Ning Ke asked, "What did you promise me by the Yiming Lake?" Yi Hongyu stopped in her tracks. Ning Ke said, "You said that if we met on the battlefield in the future, you would spare me twice." Yi Hongyu shook her head and said, "I used it once in the Taoist temple of the kingdom of Qi. I only have one left." Ning Ke said, "One is better than none. I want to use it now." "Okay," Yi Hongyu answered concisely. Then she looked at Sang Sang behind him and said, "Then I will kill her." Ning Ke's expression changed slightly. He looked at her and said seriously, "What's the difference between killing her and killing me?" Yi Hongyu thought for a while and said, "It does make sense." She stopped attacking and began to meditate. Recovering her psyche power had consumed a lot. Ning Ke was slightly relieved. Yi Hongyu said, "You are indeed much stronger than before, but I still don't understand how you could escape from Chaoyang City. Even if you could use the primordial 13 arrows to sneak attack the monks in the Xiankong Temple, you would not be able to defeat Qi Mei when they started paying attention." Ning Ke said, "That is a very long story about a little boy. I believe you will not be interested in it." "I am indeed not interested." Yi Hongyu reached out her right hand and pointed her palm at the gradually calming lake. In a moment, a Taoist sword formed by the lake water rose from the lake and was held in her hand. She looked at Ning Ke and said, "I am more interested in killing you." Ning Ke said, "Didn't you agree to spare me once?" Yi Hongyu said, "I have already spared your life. Now this is a new battle." Ning Ke's expression turned cold, and he said, "When did you become so shameless?" Yi Hongyu said, "I used to think that I had no shortcomings in fighting. Until I met you, I realized that I still have weaknesses. So I've been learning from you." Ning Ke said, "Are you learning to be shameless from me? Why don't you learn from my generosity and mercy? Or maybe you can learn from my calligraphy." Yi Hongyu ignored him and glanced at Sang Sang. She continued, "You two will travel together later, so you won't be lonely." Ning Ke thought of Kunimati's family who had died in his hands. He thought silently that such a tragic ending was never in his plan. Then he would continue to fight. His right hand had been covering the left side of his chest that was oozing blood. Unbeknownst to him, there were countless yellow talisman papers between his fingers. Those talisman papers had been soaked with blood, mottled like the evidence of a murder case. Ning Ke threw all the fu papers into the lake. He released his powerful psyche power from his sense of perception and accurately connected with each fu paper. Then, he released them at the same time. People who were good at fighting were good at learning from battles and from their opponents. Yi Hongyu was like this, and so was Ning Quebec. Yi Hongyu learned to be shameless from Ning Ke, and Ning Ke had also learned many things from his enemies in his cultivation career. For example, the countless fu papers floating above the lake. This was what he had learned when he assassinated Gu Shi, the most powerful military counselor under Xia Ho in Tuyang City. Later, he used this method to deal with Xia Ho in the house by the Yiming Lake. In a very short period of time, countless Taoist talismans were released. It seemed to happen at the same time, but in fact, the sequence of each Taoist talisman was carefully calculated. Thus, the completely different or even completely opposite Taoist talismans did not disappear because they were released in a small area. Instead, they became more beautiful and violent like flowers blooming dozens of petals and waves, until it became a sea of flowers and a storm on the sea. The aura of heaven and earth around the swamp was all summoned to the sky above the lake by these foo papers. Countless turbulence collided with each other and kept entangling and pressing against each other, directly cutting off Yi Hongyu's connection with the aura of heaven and earth. This was a very clever and magical talisman Taoism method. But for Yi Hongyu, who had a high state, it could only trap her for a moment and not kill her. Therefore, she was not afraid, even though she was alert. However, at this moment, Sang Sang, who had been standing quietly by the lake and watching Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu talk, quarrel, fight, and kill each other sinisterly as if she was an outsider, suddenly moved. The big black umbrella was opened. She held the handle and turned the umbrella to face Yi Hongyu. Then she shone brightly. There's one more chapter. Try to finish it before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 651. Holy how Ian's divine light gushed out from Song Song's body. Then it passed through the surface of the big black umbrella and shot towards the sky above the pool, instantly illuminating the dark world. Yi Hongyu was shocked speechless. She had never expected that Sang Sang would still have such pure Hao Ian's divine light in her body, even though she had become the daughter of Yama. What was going on? She was the great divine priest of judgment and had profound attainments in West Hill divine skills. Logically speaking, Hao Ian's divine light should be the weakest to her. However, the Hao Ian's divine light from the big black umbrella did not fall directly on her body. Instead, it began to refract continuously after entering the talisman storm above the pool. There seemed to be countless mirrors above the dark pool. Each mirror was a talisman, reflecting countless rays of light. The light became thicker and thicker, and when it finally reached Yi Hongyu, its power had become extremely terrifying. If Yi Hongyu still had the divine light in her eyes, she could easily withstand Song Song's Hao Ian's divine light with her divine power of the same origin. However, the divine light in her eyes had been used up when she resisted the primordial 13 arrows. Therefore, she could only watch as the divine light hit her body. A clear whistle burst out from her lips. Countless flames seeped out from under her divine robe. The flames had no temperature and were actually black. It was the legendary fire of judgment. Hao Ian's divine light collided with the fire of judgment. A thunderous sound exploded above the pool. Yi Hongyu's body was shaken and fell to the other side of the pool. Her blood-colored divine robe fluttered in the air like a flag. As she passed through the talisman storm, countless tears appeared on her robe, and countless amounts of blood spilled out. On the shore beside the pool, Sang Sang held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly with her eyes closed. Her face was very pale. After confirming that Yi Hongyu had been beaten back, she relaxed and spat out a mouthful of thick black blood. Ning Ke had no time to worry about her. He did not even have time to pick up the iron bow on the shore. His feet stepped heavily on the mud at the bottom of the pool, and his body broke through the water, pouncing on the falling Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu fell into the swamp at the back of the pool and splashed up a bit of fishy water. Her body slid along the moss for several feet before stopping. Her blood immediately stained the ground. Before she could stand up, Ning Ke's figure landed on her. He was like a tiger pouncing on its prey, calm and focused, but extremely brutal, pressing down on her body, not giving her any chance to react. Ning Ke put his arms around her back, and his legs passed through the swamp mud. He hooked her knees and held her tightly in his arms in a very intimate position. Then he suddenly exerted all his strength. He was no match for Yi Hongyu in terms of Taoism or state. He only had the advantage in terms of physical strength and strength. That was why he decided to use his strength to crush all the bones in her body. This kind of method was very bloody, but it was not uncommon in the cultivation world. For example, when martial arts cultivators fought against sore masters, they would also use this method when facing death. When the Devil's Doctrine was at its peak, there were even more powerhouses from Haotian Taoism who died in the arms of the Devil's Doctrine in such a tragic way. There was nothing wrong with the method that Ning Ke chose. However, His opponent today was Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu left the Jisho Abbey and studied at the Revelation Institute for a short period of time before directly entering the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. She had spent most of her life in the judicial department. The judicial department specialized in judging the sins of the world and hunting down the remnants of the devil's doctrine. She was once the Grand Master of the judicial department and was now the great divine priest of judgment. She was extremely familiar with the devil's doctrine's methods and naturally had a way to deal with it. Ninkei suddenly felt that the woman in his arms had turned into a fish without scales. It was very smooth, and no matter where his hands or legs landed, they would almost slip away. Furthermore, her body had suddenly become very soft and firm. No matter how hard he tried to crush her, the force was bounced off or removed by her. Knowing that it would not work, he changed his move in an instant. His left hand grabbed the collar of the robe tightly, and he lifted his left knee, viciously kicking the private part between her legs. However, Yi Hongyu's reaction was as fast as lightning. She rolled in the swamp, and the robe on her immediately loosened. She escaped Ning Kei's control and coincidentally avoided his knee attack. She stretched out her 2 fingers, and 2 sharp sword styles pierced through the air towards Ning Kei's most vulnerable eyes. Ning Kei lowered his head and used his forehead to block the attack. His feet stuck into the muddy ground of the swamp, and he stepped forward. The padao that had been hanging on his right wrist with a straw rope swung with the momentum and slashed towards Yi Hongyu's throat. Yi Hongyu stabbed her hands into the mud and used her left hand to roll again. Her robe was completely scattered, and she lifted it up like lightning, wrapping the padao in it. She dug out a ball of mud with her right hand and smashed it towards Ning Kei's face. Ning Kei dodged the mud ball, and his padao moved forward again. Yi Hongyu summoned her Taoist sword and stabbed it towards the back of his head. In a flash, the 2 of them had fought for countless rounds in the swamp. The swamp was full of soft mud, which had a serious impact on both of them. Ning Kei relied on the strength of his body to attack at close range, while Yi Hongyu displayed her battle awareness perfectly. She did not miss any opportunity and used thousands of Haotian Taoism skills, each aiming to kill him. Yi Hongyu's robe fell off and had long been shredded into pieces. Ning Kei's clothes on the upper half of his body had also been cut into pieces by the Taoist sword. The 2 naked bodies entangled and twisted, sometimes separating and sometimes approaching each other. It seemed like an erotic scene. However, both of them were bleeding profusely, and they were covered by the black and smelly mud. The wind of the blade and the sword styles were so sharp that one of them could die at any time. It had nothing to do with erotic scenes. You have Sang Sang with you. You dare not die with me. So you must die first today? You don't even wear underwear, but you didn't forget to bring comb. You still care about your body, so you are not strong enough, at least not strong enough to make me despair. In the depths of the swamp, the fog quietly arrived and then dispersed in fright. Amidst the shallow mud and moss, 2 people covered in mud kept fighting and shouting, like 2 capybaras in a bloody fight. A water mirror suddenly appeared in front of Ning Quebec. The material of the water mirror was from the ground. The dirty water mixed with moss fell on his face and immediately cut off his 5 senses. Taking advantage of this moment, Yi Hongyu's 2 slender fingers coldly stabbed into Ning Kei's left chest, right into the circular bloody hole made by the Taoist sword. The sword style exploded. Ning Kei felt a sharp pain in his chest. He felt as if his heart would split in the next moment. He howled in pain and broke the water mirror covering his face. His right fist carried the Great Spirit and fiercely punched towards the opposite side. Yi Hongyu's left hand seemed to be waving casually, but it contained the secret of the cloud hand of the Qingyun Temple of the Kingdom of Song. After such a long and dangerous battle, she finally found a chance to kill Ning Quebec. How could she not be prepared for Ning Kei's critical attack before he died? However, at such a critical moment, she forgot a very important thing. The most powerful power of the Cloud Hand Taoism of the Qingyun Taoist Temple in the Kingdom of Song should be hidden in the sleeves. It was called the Cloud Sleeves. Right now, she was naked from head to toe, so where was she going to find a sleeve? Logically speaking, Yi Hongyu should not have made such a low-level mistake with her rich fighting experience. However, she had never fought naked like a child in the mud. Without the wind of the sleeves, the power of the cloud hand of the Qingyun Taoist temple was greatly reduced. Ning Kei's right fist carried the great spirit and easily broke through the cloud momentum of her left hand. Although it was slightly weaker, it still hit heavily on her left chest. His fist landed on her chest, sending the mud flying and revealing her fair skin. Traces of blood seeped out from the edges, and several of her ribs were broken. Yi Hongyu let out an angry and painful howl. The sword style on her finger that was stuck in the bloody hole in Ning Kei's chest grew stronger and deeper. Blood was squeezed out from the edge of her finger. Ning Kei felt as if his heart had been struck by lightning. His face suddenly turned pale, and the strength in his body was about to disappear. He raised his left hand and held Yi Hongyu's right wrist tightly. He loosened his right fist and clenched it. He grabbed her fiercely and pulled her into his arms. Then he lowered his head and bit her muddy neck. After the slightly fishy smell of the swamp water, there was the slightly fishy but somewhat sweet smell of blood. At this moment, Yi Hongyu's left hand fell with the wind and was about to fall on top of his head. Once it fell, he would die. Yi Hongyu could clearly feel her neck being bitten. She could even feel her blood being sucked away. She thought of what had happened in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine many years ago. Her face suddenly turned extremely pale. The fear that had been suppressed for many years appeared in the deepest part of her eyes and then occupied her body and mind. Along with the pain in her neck, her sense of perception scattered and her body weakened. She finally believed that Ning Kei was not using this method to scare her. He really knew this evil Devil's Doctrine skill. However, the fear in her eyes suddenly turned into absolute calmness, shining like a gem. At this moment, Yi Hongyu's right hand was stuck in Ning Kei's chest, only half an inch away from his heart. Her right hand fell on the top of his head, as if she was caressing him. Ning Kei's right hand held her tightly and seemed to be extremely passionate. His head was pressed against her neck, as if he was kissing her. The scene was very intimate with Yama. Ning Kei could feel the change in her aura. He thought that this terrifying woman had decided to forcefully lower her state without hesitation like she did in the past in exchange for her life and the death of her opponent. Therefore, he stopped sucking blood and said in a slightly hoarse and unclear voice, "I am not Lotus. There is no need to kill me at the price of lowering your state. Can we stop fighting?" There was no emotion on Yi Hongyu's face. She said indifferently, "You actually learned Tao Tai? There is no reason for me to let you live." Ning Kei recalled the scene in front of the Red Lotus Temple and the process of learning Tao Tai. He smiled bitterly and murmured, "But I have never used it." Then his lips slowly left her neck and he straightened his body. Yi Hongyu's fingers slowly left his heart. Ning Kei fell back into the swamp tiredly. He moved back half a foot and looked at her. He said, "I admit that I am indeed no match for you. We will fight again after I rest." There was muddy water, blood, and a thin golden thread between his lips. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said, "If you had continued to bite me, you would have been dead." She moved her fingers slightly, and the golden thread on Ning Kei's lips flew to the ground and disappeared into the ground. Ning Kei only then noticed that there were many faint golden threads in the wounds on Yi Hongyu's body. He could not help but be shocked and asked, "What is this?" Yi Hongyu said, "When I came back from the wilderness, I buried 72 golden threads in my body. Each golden thread is a sword. If anyone wants to bite a piece of flesh from my body, he will definitely regret it." To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 652. The golden thread was very thin and tough. There was only one way to bury it in a person's body, and that was to sew it in with a needle. The process must be very painful. Who would torture themselves like this if they had no other choice? Ning Kei looked at Yi Hongyu and said, "It seems that the West Hill Divine Palace has accepted Long Qing again." Yi Hongyu said, "What does this have to do with Long Qing?" Ning Kei said, "Only Long Qing knows that I know Tao Tai. That's why you buried the money in your body." Long Qing knows that you know Tao Tai. He didn't tell the divine hall. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said, I told you that burying the money was something I did after I returned from the wilderness a few years ago. Ning Ke was a little surprised and said, Lotus was already dead then. Why did you endure so much pain and bury the money in your body? Yi Hongyu said, Because I was always ready for someone to eat me. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said, You're really crazy. He moved back a little to make sure that the blood on his chest had coagulated. He loosened his palm and held the hilt again. Yi Hongyu used mud to cover the wound on her shoulder and neck, and then calmly raised her head. Their gazes met again in the dark swamp, and they both understood the meaning in each other's eyes. No matter how valiant and fearless a warrior was, after being so close to death like the two of them, they would definitely be immersed in intense fear and longing for life. Instinctively, they would have the thought of avoiding each other and avoiding death. At the very least, they would need to rest for a long time before they could muster up the courage to fight again. But Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were not like that. He knew that Yi Hongyu would not let them leave alive, and Yi Hongyu knew that he would not give up easily. Therefore, a bloody and intense battle was about to begin. Yi Hongyu suddenly looked in front of her. Her bare feet stepped into the muddy water. Her white, jade-like toes were painted red. At this moment, they were soaked in the muddy water and had turned white. At this moment, the muddy water was trembling and continuously washing her red nails. She was stepping on a patch of slippery moss. The moss was also trembling and rubbing against her palms. It felt a little itchy and numb, as if someone was gently scratching it with a feather. Ning Ke also felt the slight vibration of the earth and felt a little confused. He looked to the west of the swamp, which was still shrouded in mist. It was a vast expanse of whiteness and nothing could be seen. The shaking of the earth gradually intensified, and the shallow water in the swamp began to ripple. Then it began to dance. The muddy water was like a dancer in gray, constantly jumping up and down. Under the moss on the surface of the swamp, an arch suddenly appeared. It extended from the edge of the mist in the west all the way to the front of them. A black shadow scuttled around, and it turned out to be a smooth capybara. Then, dozens or even more arches appeared under the mossy plain. Countless capybaras clung tightly to the swamp ground, fleeing in horror towards the east, as if there was something extremely terrifying behind them. However, the strange thing was that not a single capybara tried to drill into the depths of the swamp. Anything in large numbers would look very scary, not to mention a group of extremely ugly fellows covered in greasy hair and mud. It was even more hair-raising. Although Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were not afraid of these poisonous capybaras, they subconsciously took a few steps back and made way for them. The surface of the swamp shook more and more violently. The moss kept rolling and the muddy water kept jumping. The muddy water was like rainwater on a drum, and there was no time for it to rest. When hundreds of capybaras passed through in horror, more beasts rushed out of the mist in the west and fled towards the east. The most terrifying scene was the scene of at least tens of thousands of mud rats, squeaking and running away. Ning Ke even saw 2 snowfield direwolves among the fleeing beasts. The snowfield direwolves lived in the cold regions of the far north and were the overlords of the cold regions. As the hot sea gradually froze and the desolate men moved south, they followed them. In the past 2 years, they had become the most terrifying beasts in the depths of the wilderness, and their reputation had even spread to the central plains. However, at this moment, the snow-colored fur of the 2 giant wolves was covered with mud, and there were several extremely terrifying bite marks on their backs. They looked extremely tired and timid, and did not look as terrifying as the rumors had said. The number of fleeing beasts increased and covered the entire surface of the swamp that was not covered by the mist. Yi Hongyu was the great divine priest of judgment, and Ning Ke was also a powerhouse. However, facing such a large number of fleeing beasts and facing the wrath of nature, they did not dare to act rashly. At the beginning, when hundreds of capybaras appeared, the 2 of them each took a few steps back, and then they were forced to keep retreating. As a result, the distance between the two of them became wider and wider. At the same time, they looked towards the swamp that was covered by the mist in the west, and their expressions gradually became solemn. They silently thought about how could there be so many beasts in the swamp, and what could scare so many beasts into forming a group and fleeing. What kind of danger was hidden in the thick mist? Could it be a legendary ancient wild beast? The earth shook, and the sound of hooves was like thunder. The mist in the west of the swamp suddenly became chaotic, and a gray shadow leaped out of the mist and landed heavily on the ground, splashing mud under its hooves. To Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu's surprise, what leaped out of the mist was not an ancient wild beast, nor was it a senior cultivator who lived in seclusion in the swamp. Instead, it was a gray horse. The gray horse was agile and unusually handsome. Its long mane danced around its neck, and it ran on the soft, muddy surface of the swamp like a gray shadow. It was obviously a wild horse. However, no matter how handsome a wild horse was, it was impossible for it to scare hundreds of capybaras, tens of thousands of mud rats, and so many other beasts into fleeing in panic. At this moment, a white figure leaped out of the fog. It was a white mare that was just as majestic. Then dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of wild horses rushed out of the fog. The sound of hooves was like thunder. Under the trampling of countless horse hooves, the entire swamp seemed to be shaking. The horses neighed like roars, and the moss on the ground seemed to be blown away by a strong wind, not daring to rise. The horses were as dense as the sand in the wilderness. In an instant, the fog in the west was broken into strands, and even the thick fog was rolled up and rushed over. The Tang Empire was rich in cavalry. However, Ning Ke had never seen so many horses in his life, and Yi Hongyu had never seen them either. Such a powerful rush of horses frightened them, and they finally understood why the beasts had fled so miserably. They hurriedly retreated and made way for the horses. Ning Ke retreated, turned around, and ran back desperately. He jumped into the pool and quickly ran to the shore. He helped Sang Sang into the horse carriage, and then slapped the big black horse, who was in an extremely confused state, to wake it up. He urged it to drag the carriage and fled to the east with the wild horses. This was a great opportunity to leave. How could he miss it? The wild horses passed through the swamp violently, and the fog rolled and the earth was restless. Yi Hongyu found a withered tree by the swamp and stood on the branch, looking at the flashing shadows of horses in the fog in front of her. The fog was brought here by the wild horses, and her vision was blocked. She could only see an area in front of the tree. All kinds of wild horses ran at a high speed in front of her without any interruption, and the horses neighed continuously in the fog. Yi Hongyu's face was a little pale. There were more than thousands of wild horses. Even if all the cavalries in the world were added up, they would not be as many as this wild horse herd. How did so many wild horses survive in the swamp? Where do they find food? Why could they gallop in the dangerous swamp without worrying about being swallowed? There were many unexplainable questions. The fog in the swamp was like a layer of coat over the questions, making it impossible for her to touch the truth. Her mood became a little heavy. After a long time, the fog gradually calmed down, and the sound of horses' hooves gradually faded away. In the depths of the fog, there was a messy sound of hooves. It could be a horse that was alone, and there were a few unpleasant caws that sounded like black crows. Yi Hongyu's expression suddenly became serious, and she woke up from the shock. She jumped off the dead tree and rushed towards the pool. However, when she passed through the pool and came to the shore, the black horse carriage had already disappeared. On the ground by the pool, there was a dress. Yi Hongyu looked at the dress and did not say anything. She knew that it was left for her by Ning Ke and Sang Sang. The black horse carriage blended into the wild horse herd, rushed into the thick fog, and ran wildly towards the east. The horse neighed outside the carriage, and the dense sound of hooves even made people's ears hurt. Although they had escaped from Yi Hongyu under the cover of the wild horse herd, Ning Ke was still very nervous, or even more nervous. This was because he knew that wild horses were very violent, especially such a large herd of wild horses. They could be kings in the wilderness, and they had previously chased the giant wolves and capybaras into a mess. If the wild horse herd refused to accept the big black horse, and especially refused to accept the horse carriage, then the situation would become very dangerous. Fortunately, after the wild horse herd confirmed that the big black horse was their kind and qualified to travel with them, they did not attack them. Only a dozen wild horses nearby looked at the carriage as they ran, and even a young stallion curiously moved its head to the window, as if it had never seen a horse carriage before. When the wild horse herd appeared, the big black horse was very uneasy, because even it had never seen so many of its kind, especially in a geographical environment like the swamp. Therefore, when it merged with the wild horse herd, it behaved very obediently and kept a low profile. However, when it found that it was still faster than the wild horse herd, confidence and pride returned to its body. It raised its head higher and higher and snorted louder and louder. When the young stallion tried to poke its head into the window, it neighed with extreme displeasure. The young stallion neighed back with some dissatisfaction. Ninkei's heart skipped a beat, and he wanted to kick the big black horse away. Fortunately, the young stallion did not do anything other than neighing. The black horse carriage mingled with the wild horse herd and ran toward the east side of the swamp. They ran for a whole day and night, and the horses only rested twice. Ninkei wanted to leave, but the carriage was surrounded by black horses, and it was impossible to squeeze out. Moreover, he found something strange. The wild horse herd seemed to be able to find the legendary real path when they ran in the swamp, so they did not encounter any danger. Since the wild horse herd was not hostile and could pass through the swamp faster, Ninkei was certainly willing to go with them. The next morning, the wild horse herd finally ran out of the swamp and came to the wilderness. Under the morning light, green grass gradually grew. The black horse carriage came out of the fog and saw such a beautiful scenery. Ninkei suddenly felt relaxed. Suddenly, he heard cawing coming from the fog behind him, and thought that these black crows were really haunting him. He angrily scolded, "Shut up!" The cawing still sounded in the fog, and it sounded extremely dissatisfied. Ninkei looked back. The fog gradually dispersed, and 8 unusually handsome horses came out. These 8 horses pulled a Taoist chariot. On the chariot sat a black donkey. It was not the crows that were cawing, but the donkey. Send the first chapter here, and fight for the next chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 653. The 8 horses were all very handsome. Any one of them was at least as good as the white horse that Chanyu of the Left King's Palace had given to the flower addict years ago. One could imagine how luxurious the sedan must be to have 8 horses pulling it. However, the truth was that the carriage was very shabby. The holes on both sides had been blocked by a few pieces of deadwood, and even if they were successfully repaired, the embroidered cushions on the carriage had long since rotted. No matter how one looked at it, it looked like it had been picked out from a garbage dump. But this was not the point. The point was the donkey on the sedan. The donkey was not big and was completely black except for its mouth. It was lying lazily on the sedan with its 4 hooves pointing to the sky like wooden sticks. There was a basket of yellow fruits on the sedan. The black donkey was chewing one in its mouth. Judging from the crisp sound of juice, it should be rich in juice. In a desolate and uninhabited swamp, there was actually a herd of tens of thousands of wild horses. This was already a very shocking thing, but the one commanding this herd of wild horses was actually a donkey. Furthermore, this donkey was sitting on the chariot like a human, lazily eating fruit. Anyone who saw it would think that it was a monster. Ninkei knew that the black donkey was not a monster because he was used to seeing such behavior in the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether it was the old yellow bull, the big white goose, or his big black horse, they were all like this. If the black donkey on the sedan was really a monster, then he had lived with monsters for many years. When he first saw the black donkey on the chariot, he had already guessed its origins. In the back of the mountain of the academy, on the top floor of the House of Red Sleeves, at the bottom of Daming Lake, from second brother, Aunt Jin, and many others, whenever he heard stories about youngest uncle, he would always hear people mention the little black donkey. He became familiar with it after hearing so many stories. Although he had never seen the little black donkey, it had always occupied a place in his heart. He was not afraid at all. He only could not suppress his excitement. He jumped off the carriage and rushed to the shabby sedan. It was only when Ning Kei came to the front of the chariot that he noticed that the black donkey's fur was not very smooth. Some parts of it had already fallen off, making it look like a bald spot. He could not help but be stunned and then felt sad. Decades ago, youngest uncle rode the little black donkey out of the academy and entered Chang. Then, he rode the black donkey to travel the world. He went to the Lang Temple, entered the wilderness, and went to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. The little black donkey witnessed countless legends in the cultivation world. However, decades later, even though the little black donkey was still alive, it was still old. It was no longer a little black donkey, but an old black donkey. Several strong wild horses came from the back of the sedan and blocked Ning Kei's view. Ning Kei jumped up and waved at the sedan, shouting, "I'm from the academy. I'm from the academy." The old black donkey leaned against the back of the chariot and chewed on his fruit with a lazy expression. He didn't care at all. Ning Kei thought that even if the donkey could understand human language, it would not believe that he was from the academy with just a few words. He could not help but feel that he was stupid. With a slight thought, the crystal liquid floating in the depths of his body rotated slowly. The pure, great spirit slowly poured into his arm and then dissipated into the air along his fingers. A strong and determined aura suddenly appeared beside the shabby sedan. The black donkey continued chewing on his fruit and still ignored Ning Quebec. It thought mockingly that if it had not discovered that Ning Kei was a disciple of the academy, why would it waste so much effort to save him? It could not even understand this and actually used the great spirit to perform like an idiot. How embarrassing. It seemed that the academy was getting worse with each generation. Ning Kei did not understand why the black donkey did not respond, but he understood the mocking expression on its face. He sighed and thought that it was indeed youngest uncle's donkey. It was actually so proud and arrogant. The big black horse stared in the direction of the shabby sedan with its round eyes. It had spent a long time with the old yellow ox in the back of the mountain of the academy. How could it not know about the black donkey? Looking at Ning Kei's expression, it guessed that this was the black donkey. It could not help but feel shocked and uneasy. After thinking about it for a long time, it finally plucked up its courage and walked over. The 8 extraordinarily handsome wild horses saw the way it walked over with its head lowered and felt that it was too sneaky. They neighed solemnly and issued a stern warning. The big black horse was so frightened by the stern neigh that its front legs turned to jelly and it almost knelt down. The black donkey did not want to pay attention to Ning Kei, but it was obviously interested in the big black horse. It cawed twice and gestured to the 8 horses that it was its nephew and asked it to come over. The big black horse moved with great difficulty to the front of the sedan with trembling legs. It was extremely humble and careful as it stuck its head into the sedan and gently rubbed the black donkey's round belly. It stuck out its tongue and licked it. In the back of the mountain of the academy, it had been bullied by the big white goose named Wooden Fish. It thought that the white goose was only its senior brother, and the donkey was its uncle. It did not know how to deal with it, so it had to quickly please it. The black donkey hummed twice and seemed very satisfied and comfortable. It clumsily patted the basket beside it with its front hooves and gestured for the big black horse to take some for itself, just like an elder giving snacks to a child. The big black horse understood and was ecstatic. It did not dare to take more and carefully held one in its mouth. Then it bowed its head repeatedly to show its most sincere respect and gratitude. It wagged its rump and tail to please the 8 horses before it trotted away. It returned to the front of the sedan and began to chew happily. The black donkey looked at its silly and shameless behavior and could not help but shake its head. It called softly as if it was sighing. Then it looked at Ning Kei and thought of his silly and shameless behavior when he fought with the shameless Taoist nun in the swamp yesterday. It shook its head again and called softly, looking very disappointed. Ning Kei was a little embarrassed. He thought that the combination of him and the big black horse was indeed a little embarrassing compared to the combination of youngest uncle and the little black donkey in terms of temperament and strength. The black donkey cawed twice, and the 8 horses in front of the sedan raised their heads and were ready to leave. Just as Ning Kai was about to speak, the black crows on the black horse carriage finally could not help but caw with him, looking very happy. The black donkey was furious. It did not care if you were Yama or a broken crow transformed by Hao Ian. How dare you imitate me and caw again? It was too disrespectful. The black crows were not real to begin with. Ninkei could not kill them with arrows or talismans. But when they heard the black donkey's caw, they suddenly felt dizzy and did not dare to make another sound in fear. Looking at the broken sedan that was gradually moving, Ning Kai chased after it and shouted, "It's rare for us to meet. We should at least talk more. I'm considered youngest uncle's official disciple. I'm the only one who can use the Great Spirit now. His inheritance should be mine. If you continue like this, I won't be polite to you anymore." The black donkey bared its belly and faced Hao Ian leisurely. It did not care about Ning Kai at all. Ignoring him was the greatest humiliation. Ning Kai became even more embarrassed and said, "Then how can I find you in the future?" The black donkey still did not respond. Ning Kai said again, "Don't you want to go back to the academy? The headmaster is still alive, and so is the old yellow bull. Eldest brother and second brother are not children anymore. They should miss you very much." The black donkey hesitated slightly and turned to look at Ning Quebec. After a moment of silence, it grinned, revealing its white teeth as if it was laughing. Then, with a loud caw, it retracted its left foreleg and pointed its right foreleg to the north. The wild horses that were resting on the meadow raised their heads without hesitation when they heard the donkey's caw. They abandoned the first fresh grass they had eaten in more than 10 days and gathered into a herd to gallop. In an instant, smoke and dust rose and the sound of hooves was like thunder. Countless wild horses covered the entire wilderness and began to gallop at high speed. There was no disorder at all, and they seemed to be extremely disciplined, like an army. Ning Kai had thought that the black donkey was very funny when it retracted its hoof and stretched out its other hoof. Now, looking at the shocking scene of tens of thousands of horses galloping, he suddenly felt that the black donkey was like a majestic and inviolable general who was reaching out his right hand to guide his army to a target. The wild horses galloped away, and the smoke and dust gradually settled. Ning Kai stood on the meadow and looked at the black dots that covered the mountains and plains in the distance. He looked at the broken sedan that was faintly discernible among them and remained silent. After a long time, he muttered to himself, "I'll never eat donkey barbecued again." Ning Kai vaguely understood that the black donkey was the leader of the wild horses. It had led countless horses through the 2 ends of the swamp and the cold plains in the north to chase after water and grass. Any place that the herdsmen could not go or the cavalry could not reach was their world of freedom. The truth in the herdsmen's legends might have been formed by the wild horses trampling through the swamp overgrown with water and grass over the past few decades. As for the bloody battle between him and Yi Hongyu, when he was about to die, the black donkey and the wild horses happened to pass through that place. There was no such coincidence or luck in the world. Naturally, the black donkey wanted to save him and bring him out of the swamp. But why are there 8 horses pulling the sedan? What's so special about it? He looked at the wild horses moving like shadows in the distance and asked subconsciously. Sang Sang placed her little face on the window and looked at the horses that were stirring up smoke and dust in the distance. She said, "Did youngest uncle and the headmaster of the academy like to send out 8 horses when they drank wine? Maybe?" Ning Kai walked into the horse carriage and looked back at the wild horses that were getting further and further away. He thought to himself that youngest uncle had been seeking freedom all his life. The black donkey was living such a life now. Why should he bother it and feel sad for it? The sky was blue and the field was vast. Cattle and sheep could be seen in the grass when the wind blew. Now that it was spring, the grass was not very tall. When the wind blew, the grass would bend slightly and then shoot up instantly. When the grass was standing, it could not block the sheep that were scattered in the meadow like clouds. The black horse carriage left Uoluan and passed through the mud and swamp. Finally, it came to the wilderness where the Golden Palace was. The Golden Palace was a country that was almost forgotten by all the countries in the Central Plains, except the Tang. Ning Ke joined the army in the city of Wei and belonged to the northern border military of the Tang Empire. He had been collecting firewood at Shubi Lake for many years and was naturally very familiar with the Golden Palace and the wilderness. The black horse carriage passed through the sparsely populated meadow in silence, like a black cloud. Also, try to finish before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 654. The wilderness where the Golden Tribe Royal Court was located had a relatively good climate. Water and grass were fertile, and there were many cattle and sheep. They had lived for thousands of years and had a dense population, forming more than 20 large tribes. There were nearly 100,000 elite cavalries under the command of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Except for the Tang Empire, no other country was a match for the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It was because the Tang Empire had suppressed the Golden Tribe Royal Court in the wilderness for hundreds of years that the other countries in the Central Plains gradually forgot about the existence of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Even the South Jin Kingdom dared to boast that it was the second most powerful country in the world. Even the Tang Empire was reluctant to start a full-scale war with the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Princess Liu of the Tang Empire married into the wilderness to avoid the chaos caused by the Imperial Astronomer's Edict. It also proved the importance of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to the Tangs. Ning Ke had dealt with the cavalries of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the horse gang, disguised by the cavalries for many years. He was very clear about the strength of the barbarians in the wilderness. In addition to the extremely fierce cavalries with amazing horsemanship, there were more than 10 high priests supported by the royal court, whose cultivation was close to or even reached the knowing destiny state. Therefore, even though he knew that the Golden Tribe Royal Court did not believe in Hao Yin and there was no legend of the underworld invasion, he was still very vigilant when the black horse carriage traveled in the wilderness. Ning Ke was seriously injured in the battle with Yi Hongyu in the swamp and was slowly recuperating. Sang Sang used divine skills and consumed a lot of Hao Yin's divine light. The cold aura in her body became more and more restless. Even the Buddhist Dharma could not suppress it. She coughed badly, and her body became colder and colder. He was very worried about Sang Sang's health and the people who wanted to kill her. Observing the tracks and ruts, he was sure that many cultivators from the Buddhism and Taoism sects had arrived in the wilderness. Fortunately, the sky of the wilderness was covered with dark clouds for several days after leaving the swamp. The dark cloud that had been following Sang Sang blended into the sky and was hard to distinguish. In the early spring of the wilderness, many birds flew from Min Mountain and the counties in the north of the Tang Empire. The black crow was no longer so dazzling. Ning Ke made vines and hung them around the horse carriage as a camouflage. He also used the mud from the gray powder rock to cover the big black horse. He used the gift of heaven to hide his tracks and continued to sneak eastward. One day, Sang Sang sensed that there were cultivators chasing after her from more than 10 miles away. Ning Ke looked at the vast plain in front of him. There was no place for him to hide, so he drove the horse carriage to a pile of rocks in the south and continued to hide. If he was discovered, it would be a good place for an ambush. The first to arrive at the field were not the cultivators who had been chasing after Sang Sang, but more than 100 grassland cavalrymen. Looking at the soft armor on the cavalrymen and the light chariot behind them, Ning Ke's expression turned serious. He judged that the cavalrymen should be the elites of the palace, and the people in the light chariot were most likely priests. A moment later, 3 cultivators arrived on horseback and met the elite cavalrymen of the Golden Palace in the field north of the pile of rocks. The 3 cultivators carried Taoist swords and should be from Haotian Taoism. However, it was unknown whether they were priests from the West Hill Divine Palace or visiting professors from a Taoist temple in the world. Ning Ke could not hear what they were talking about, but judging from the 3 cultivators' expressions and the grassland cavalryman's posture, He knew that the three cultivators had perfectly displayed the demeanor that cultivators showed to ordinary people, which was pride, indifference, and contempt. He could not help but fall silent, knowing that a battle was about to happen. There were three palaces among the barbarians of the wilderness. Among them, the right king's palace worshipped Buddhism and was not aggressive. The left king's palace was threatened by the desolate man's southward invasion, so they were forced to fight side by side with the allied forces of the Central Plains. Only the Golden Palace was the strongest and had never been stingy with their hostility towards the people of the Central Plains. If ordinary people had a natural reverence for cultivators, the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace obviously did not. With a whistle, dozens of cavalrymen left the camp and charged towards the three cultivators like lightning. The boxwood bows in their hands were already taut and ready to shoot. The three Haoyan Taoism cultivators had been cultivating in the Taoist temples of the Central Plains all year round and were deeply respected by ordinary people. They would never have thought that ordinary people would dare to attack them. They immediately flew into a rage and pinched the sword formula. The Taoist swords behind them suddenly rose and flew with the wind in the wilderness, stabbing one of the cavalrymen in an instant. Ninkei looked at the crisscrossing sword light and realized that the three cultivators were actually masters of the see-through state. One of them had even reached the peak of the see-through state. No wonder they were still so tough in the wilderness. Looking at the light chariot behind the cavalrymen, he still did not think that the three powerhouses from Haoyan Taoism could defeat the elite cavalrymen. After all, this was the Golden Palace, not the Central Plains where cultivators could be arrogant. The dozens of cavalrymen who stayed put were the first to shoot arrows. The arrows fell on the three cultivators like rain. One of the cultivators called back his Taoist sword and set up a sword screen in front of him to block most of the arrows. Then, the cavalrymen pulled out short spears from the side of their saddles and threw them again with a deep roar. The short spears were much heavier than the arrows. The dozens of short spears pierced through the air with a shocking momentum. The cultivator pinched the sword formula and kept slashing in the air with his Taoist sword. However, he could no longer block the short spears as easily as he did with the arrows. His Taoist sword was even trembling from the attacks. After a dozen muffled sounds, the hard short spears were inserted into the ground of the wilderness. One of them stabbed into the abdomen of a horse ridden by a cultivator. That horse neighed miserably, jumping about in pain, immediately throwing that cultivator off its back. The leader of the cavalrymen shouted, and the dozens of cavalrymen who stayed put also joined the charging team. The first dozens of cavalrymen were extremely fast and were already in front of the three cultivators. The three powerhouses from Haoyan Taoism suddenly looked serious and used their psyche power. For a moment, the sword light flashed, and there were cavalrymen falling off their horses or horses neighing and falling. However, the power of the Taoist sword was limited and could only make a small cut on the leather armor. Moreover, many of the cavalrymen were hiding in the bellies of the horses and could not be pierced by the flying swords. The distance of dozens of feet seemed very long, but it was very short for the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace. After a few breaths, more than 100 cavalrymen surged over like waves and drowned the three cultivators in an instant. There were only a few clean swishing sounds and blood splattered. The cavalrymen of the palace scattered, and the three powerhouses from Haoyan Taoism fell to the ground in the middle of the field. They had already become corpses. The powerhouse at the peak of see-through was lying in the grass, covered in blood. He held an item in each of his hands. The one in his right hand was his life-saving measure, and the one in his left was a firework communication device. According to the agreement, if he saw Ning Kei and the daughter of Yama, he had to turn on the device and inform the main force. However, whether it was his life-saving measure or the firework communication device, he did not have time to turn it on before he was killed by the wolf-like cavalrymen of Palace. One could imagine how fast it all happened. The cavalrymen of the palace cleaned up the battlefield and left quickly. Looking at the number of corpses on the horses, there were only about a dozen people who died under the flying swords of the three cultivators. A chance encounter in the wilderness turned into a sudden battle. The three cultivators in the see-through state, faced with more than 100 cavalrymen of the palace, did not seem to have any ability to resist and were killed cleanly. The black horse carriage came out of the pile of rocks and turned south. Ning Ke thought about the bloody battle that had suddenly started and ended. After a moment of silence, he once again confirmed a point of view. Non-martial cultivators, if they had not joined the devil or entered the knowing destiny state, would never be a match for the army. This conclusion was completely different from the impression of most ordinary people in the world, but it was the truth. Because cultivators had a weakness that could not be solved, and that was their bodies. The bodies of cultivators were as weak as those of ordinary people. It was the same when they entered the knowing destiny state. Whether it was feather arrows or machetes, they could easily take their lives, not to mention the tens of thousands of arrows shot at the same time when two armies fought, or the terrifying catapults and ballistae during sieges. More importantly, cultivators used the chi of heaven and earth to control their natal flying swords. The killing range of the flying swords was limited by the degree of psyche power. Most flying swords could not exceed the range of feather arrows. Moreover, if the flying swords wanted to break all kinds of armors, they had to be extremely sharp. However, they could not be too thin to avoid damage after breaking the armor, so it was extremely difficult to cast them. This was why ordinary cultivators did not dare to go against the country, and had to serve the imperial court of each country. This was also why, in the traditional view, a sword master always had a warrior as his bodyguard. When Ning Ke was serving in the army in the city of Wei, he had basically never seen cultivators, let alone fought with them. He only remembered General Ma's expression when he was drunk and told stories about the battlefield. General Ma's attitude was very contemptuous. He thought that cultivators were very strong individually, but not very useful in a battlefield. Therefore, he was not surprised by the result of the battle between cultivators and the army today. But the process of the battle surprised him. The palace priest in the light carriage did not make a move, and the cavalry easily and neatly finished the battle, turning the three cultivators into corpses. The elite cavalry of the Golden Palace was indeed strong, and even stronger than before. He looked out of the window at the scenery that was gradually becoming familiar, and his expression was slightly solemn. The heroic former Golden Palace Chanyu, Li Yu's man and Xiaoman's father, had died young, which was not necessarily a good thing. His younger brother had taken over the position of Chanyu, and now it seemed that the Chanyu was no less intelligent and capable than his elder brother. It was rumored that the Chanyu was more ambitious. Ning Ke was a Tang, and also a Tang soldier who had been stationed at the border for many years. Even though he was fleeing with Sang Sang, he still could not help but start to worry about the situation at the northern border of the Tang Empire. Sang Sang looked out of the window at the scenery of the wilderness, and her little face was slightly red from the wind. She said, "It looks a little familiar. Have we been here before?" Ning Ke looked out of the window and said, "I brought you here once. If we go further south, we will reach Shubi Lake." To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 655. Shubi Lake was near. Could the city of Wei be far away? It was quiet in the carriage. Sang Sang glanced at Ning, Quebec Ning. Ke did not respond. He had made a decision in the White Tower Temple. Now he did not even return to the academy. Why would he go to the city of Wei? Shubi Lake was located between the 7 stockade villages and the Golden Palace on the border of the Tang Empire. It was a rare freshwater lake in the wilderness. The rocky bottom of the lake, after years of erosion, extended to the west and connected with the elongated body of the lake. It looked like a comb, which was how it got its name. Caravans often stopped by the lake, so the horse gang often appeared here. The battle of blood and money lasted for many years. No one knew when it started, but the caravans were gradually forced to choose more remote and difficult routes, and Shubi Lake became a gathering place and hiding place for the horse gang. In the evening, the black carriage came to the periphery of Shubi Lake. The sky was covered by clouds, blocking most of the sunlight. It was as dark as night. From a distance, bonfires could be seen by the lake, Singing could be heard faintly, and even the aroma of barbecue and liquor could be smelled. The carriage wheels rolled over the simple dirt road in the Rocky Mountains and dense forest by the lake, making a squeaking sound. It smoothly avoided the hidden sentries left by the horse gang and came to the lake. For Ning-Kei, who had been here countless times and was familiar with Shubi Lake like home, it was a very accurate description to say that he was familiar with the road. There were more than 10 bonfires by the lake, divided into 3 places according to the distance. Hundreds of horse gang were eating and drinking around the bonfires, which should belong to 3 forces. The horse gang in the wilderness was the most cold-blooded and cunning creatures. They were extremely greedy and would never trust any outsiders, especially their peers. If these horse gang met in the wilderness, they might have already killed each other. But this would not happen at Shubi Lake, because it was the rule. There was a very thick piece of firewood at the bottom of each bonfire, making a soft crackling sound. The flame was like a giant's tongue, constantly licking the rolling roast sheep. The fat dripping from the roast sheep was like the invisible giant's saliva. Singing, drinking, and women's coquettish whispers echoed in Shubi Lake. The horse gang drank and played with women, looking very happy. But their knives and arrows were very close to them, and they could pick them up at any time. The horse gang's machetes were generally not sheathed. Under the light of the fire, mottled bloodstains could be seen, some of which were very bright. Presumably, some caravans or lone patrolling cavalrymen were killed by the machetes not long ago. The horse gang had been very happy these years. The horse gang had been confronting the Tang Empire for a long time. Both of them were very cautious, so they seldom went into the wilderness to clear their enemies. Horse gang suddenly felt that the wilderness was much less. The Tang of the Tang. So horse gang was of Tang, was Shaf the Tang of Tang. And Chun, the Chun, of gang of Long of Shan of Chun of the kingdom. Horse gang of gang also knew. Lake, of Shan of Chung of Lessa Mountain. Horse of Tian Shan was San. He had. And Shan of Shan of Wang. Shan of Mountain of County of Tang Shan. Dynasty Shan Shan. King of Tang gang of Shan Mountain of Chun of Lake. A lonely horse carriage appeared at Shubi Lake in front of the 300 most ruthless horse bandits. It was like a little white rabbit walking into a pack of wolves that had been starved for countless days. However, the horse gang did not rush forward with a strange cry. Instead, they seemed to be somewhat vigilant. The 3 leaders of the horse gang looked at each other across the fire and saw the uneasiness in each other's eyes. Shubi Lake had long been famous, so neither caravans nor travelers would choose to stay overnight here. It was very strange that this black carriage came from the wilderness and dared to travel alone, even daring to come here. A horse gang leader looked at the black carriage and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I don't know where you come from. How about you come to our shabby house? Please come out and meet us." What answered this leader was an arrow. With a whoosh, an arrow accurately shot into the space between his eyebrows, drilling out a bloody hole. The leader's eyes widened, and just like that, he fell to the ground and died. The horse bandits around the bonfire were in an uproar. They pushed away the women in their arms and stood up with their knives in their hands, especially the dozens of horse bandits under the leader's command. They shouted sternly and rushed towards the carriage. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of the arrow was endless. In a very short time, 7 or 8 horse gang at the forefront had an arrow between their eyebrows. Like trees that had been cut down, they kept falling and heavily hit the ground. Ning-Kei walked down from the carriage with the box of arrows on his back and a boxwood bow in his hand. He looked at the frightened horse gang and said, "When did Shubi Lake become your place?" The night was dark, and the bonfire was swaying in the wind. The dim light fell on his black academy uniform and his expressionless face, revealing his eyebrows and eyes very clearly. Shubi Lake was the lair of the horse gang in the wilderness. Even the border army of the Tang Empire had to form a team before daring to come here. However, this man actually said that Shubi Lake was his home. One of the leaders of the horse gang looked at his face and frowned, as if he was recalling something. Suddenly, his face turned pale as he thought of the bleak, stormy, and miserable time a few years ago. He turned around and ran to his mount. As he ran, he desperately kicked his subordinates who were still in a daze. He shouted in a trembling voice, "You're all *king blind. Get up and follow me." The horse gang around the bonfire did not understand why their leader suddenly became like this. They thought that although the man's archery was excellent, he was only one person. How could he kill more than 300 horse gangs? Big Brother was usually the bravest and most ruthless. How could he become more timid than a woman today? Another horse gang leader also remembered at this time. Looking at the young man beside the black carriage, he shouted with a pale face, "Hurry up, the woodcutter is back." The bank of Shubi Lake fell into a dead silence. The horse gang's expressions became extremely strange, as if the world had frozen. Then the next moment, with an extremely shrill scream, the horse gang came to their senses and fled in all directions. The woodcutter. It's the woodcutter from the city of Wei. The woodcutter. In the unwritten history of Shubi Lake, the most famous figure was not the legendary former horse gang leader who hid 10,000 taels of gold at the bottom of the lake, but a young Tang soldier in the city of Wei. The Tang army called the activities of cleaning up the horse gang or robbing the horse gang by pretending to be the horse gang as firewood collecting. Those who carried out this activity must be the best elite cavalry, generally called woodcutter or woodcutter. Since the young Tang soldier in the city of Wei joined the team of firewood collecting, the woodcutter mentioned by the horse gang in the wilderness only referred to that young man. This was the woodcutter of Shubi Lake that the horse gang had been talking about. The young Tang soldier did not rob the most taels of silver, nor did he kill the most horse gang, but he was definitely the object that the horse gang of Shubi Lake feared the most. Those miserable days were still a pain in their memories until today. It was not until the young Tang soldier left the city of Wei and went to Chong, and that the horse gang of Shubi Lake regained their courage and regained the pleasure and happiness of wielding knives in the wind. The woodcutter of Shubi Lake was the nightmare of all the horse gang. There was no horse gang that was not afraid of him. When the news from Chong and spread to the wilderness, the horse gang knew that he had become a student of the second floor of the academy and the most trusted subordinate of the Tang Emperor. Their fear and even some abnormal admiration suddenly rose to the peak. But at the same time, they thought that he was already a person from another world and could not come back to Shubi Lake to deal with the relatively lowly horse gang. So they were a lot more relieved. But tonight, the woodcutter returned to Shubi Lake again. Countless screams sounded by Shubi Lake. Women were screaming, and the usually cold-blooded and cruel horse gang were also screaming like women. It was chaos around the bonfire, and the horses' hooves were hurrying. In a very short time, hundreds of horse gang left with their women like the wind, and the lakeside became extremely quiet. During this process, none of the horse gang members dared to attack Ning Quebec. No one even dared to look at where he was. They looked terrified and even thought it was ridiculous. Ning K carried the boxwood bough on his shoulder, pulled the reins, and led the black carriage to a bonfire by the lake. Then he helped Sang Sang down from the carriage and let her sit on the carpet left by the horse gang. The roast lamb on the bonfire was still dripping with grease, giving off a tempting aroma. Ning K would not be polite to the horse gang. He took out a sharp knife, picked the best part, and cut 3 large plates of meat. Then he went to the bonfire and took out 2 unopened leather bags of liquor and handed them to Sang Sang. Sang Sang ate the meat and drank the liquor in small mouthfuls. Ning K ate the meat and drank the liquor in small mouthfuls. In a short time, he finished the roast meat on the plate and drank the liquor in the bag. Ning K turned to look at Shubi Lake, which he had not seen for many years. Sang Sang looked at his profile and said, "Aren't you afraid that the horse gang will reveal our whereabouts?" Shubi Lake is the sphere of influence of the Tang Empire. Neither the Golden Tribe nor the Buddhism or Taoism sects dare to enter at will. Even if they want to kill us, it should be the Tangs who do it. Ning K suddenly noticed that there was a pile of charred wood by the lake. The wood was surrounded by a circle of stones, and a whole leg of lamb was placed on top of it. It looked like an altar, but he did not know what god it was for. In his memory, neither the barbarians of the Golden Tribe Royal Court nor the horse gang had such a worship ceremony. Beside a bonfire in the distance, a horse gang was so drunk that he passed out. He was ruthlessly abandoned by his companions and did not know what had happened. Ning Ke walked over and threw him into the cold lake. The horse gang immediately woke up after being hit by the cold lake water. It did not take Ning Ke much effort to find out what he wanted to know, such as the current situation of the city of Wei and the recent situation of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. He also knew that the simple altar by the lake was a religion that had been rising in the wilderness in recent years. The god that the religion worshipped was called Tungri. Ning Ke had never heard of this name, nor had he heard of this religion. After a moment of silence, he decided not to think about it anymore. He took out his padao and chopped off the horse gang's head. His movement of chopping off the head was very smooth, as if he had repeated it countless times. In fact, he had indeed done this movement so many times that it was more like a habit. After chopping off the horse gang's head, Ning Ke came to his senses. He was no longer a soldier of the Tang Empire, nor a woodcutter of Shubi Lake. There was no need to kill this person. However, if he killed them, then so be it. He would not feel any guilt. All the horse gang's hands were stained with the blood of innocent people. They all deserved to die. He had let the 300 horse gang go because he was very tired and not in the mood, and it was indeed difficult to kill all of them. Since this horse gang dared to get drunk at Shubi Lake, then he should die. It could be regarded as the woodcutter's worship or commemoration of Shubi Lake. I haven't eaten yet. I'm going to eat first. The next chapter may be at 1 o'clock in the night. If you can't wait, please go to bed first. You can read it tomorrow. Anyway, I'll try my best to continue writing. Now that the situation is grim, I need your monthly vote. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 656. When Ning Ke woke up, it was still dark by the Shubi Lake. He poured the remaining mutton into the ashes of the bonfire in front of him and carried Sang Sang back to the carriage. Then he let the big black horse start the journey to the south. The black horse carriage was not as fast as it was a few days ago. It set off before dawn and arrived at the outskirts of the earthen city in the south of the Shubi Lake when it was almost noon. Sang Sang had already woken up. She leaned against the window and looked at the familiar scenery without saying anything. Her expression did not change until she saw the border city surrounded by lush in the distance. Ning Ke looked at the small city in the distance and said, "Let's look at it more. We may never see it again." The two had lived in the Min Mountains since childhood, full of cruelty, blood, and betrayal. It was not until they came to the city of Wei to join the army that they finally had a relatively peaceful life and tasted the warmth of the human world for the first time. They had lived in this border city for many years and had their own home and many debts. The city of Wei was their real hometown. Ma Shixiang had been a deputy general in the city of Wei for many years. Because he had no family background and there was no big war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe, it was extremely difficult for him to accumulate military merits. Therefore, he had never been promoted. In another year, he would retire from the border army and return to his hometown in Langhe County. He was very satisfied with this because he had accumulated a lot of silver over the years. His only regret was that he had less money to collect firewood in recent years. Since that guy left the city of Wei with his handmaiden, the fate of the city of Wei seemed to have worsened. The pressure of the Golden Tribe Royal Court on the wilderness on the border of the Tang Empire gradually increased. Although the Golden Tribe Royal Court still dared not invade the border, the cavalrymen of the big tribes often pretended to be horse gangs and attacked the logistic teams heading to Helan City, which annoyed the 7 stockade villages, including the city of Wei, and even the entire northern border army. Now Ma Shixiang was more worried about another thing. Looking at the dark clouds gradually floating over the city of Wei, his gray hair trembled slightly. How could he deal with those bigwigs in the city? Now, in the city of Wei, in addition to hundreds of experienced cavalrymen, many bigwigs also came a few days ago. 2 real generals of the Imperial Military Ministry with dozens of crossbowmen, more than 10 officials of the Imperial Center Administration, and 3 officials of the Imperial Astronomer all came to this inconspicuous border town for some reason. It was said that the other frontier fortresses in the Chiching Stockade village were in similar situations, but the city of Wei was obviously the focus of the bigwigs in Chong. And there were several powerhouses from the Southern Gate Temple among the dozens of officials from the Imperial Center Administration. The powerful Yamen in Chong and seemed to have transferred all its power here and directly took over the jurisdiction of the border. Surprisingly, the northern military camp did not make any violent reaction. There was no absolute secret in the world. The reason why these people came to the city of Wei had been spread 2 days ago. People in the city of Wei were shocked, but they had to accept it, because they all saw the order issued by the West Hill Divine Palace and knew that it was true. As the dark cloud drew closer, Ma Shixiang's mood became heavier and heavier. He did not know what he should do or what he could do. When a military official issued the military order, he was so confused that he did not hear it. "General Ma, did you hear what I said? Immediately lead the cavalrymen out of the city and rush to that cloud. Stop that black horse carriage at all costs." The military official shouted in a low voice. Ma Shixiang felt a little relieved and asked, "Only drive it away?" A gloomy Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple said, "If there's a chance to kill the daughter of Yama, of course we can't miss it. Then tell your subordinates to act according to the situation and cooperate with us." Hundreds of cavalrymen went out of the city of Wei, with several horse carriages among them. Ma Shixiang on the horse in the front was very silent. So were the cavalrymen. In the silent and depressing atmosphere, the team came to a slightly higher meadow. The dark clouds had already passed the meadow and were extremely wide. The front part was about to enter the city of Wei, but the back part seemed to stay near the Shubi Lake, covering the sky for many miles. The cavalrymen looked up at the clouds above their heads, still silent, but their expressions were extremely complicated. When they looked down, they saw the black horse carriage moving slowly under the clouds and exclaimed. Several adjutants and hundreds of cavalrymen looked at their superior at the same time. Ma Shixiang pulled the reins with blue veins slightly visible, but his face was expressionless and he did not give any orders. An official of the Imperial Center Administration got off the carriage and looked at the black horse carriage in the distance. His expression suddenly became serious, and he found that the cavalrymen around him did not move. He shouted angrily, "What are you waiting for?" Ma Shixiang said, "I received the military order not to let that black horse carriage enter the city. Now it has not entered the city, so we can only wait." The Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple shouted, "This is a great opportunity to kill the daughter of Yama. What are you hesitating for? Do you want to let that horse carriage go?" Ma Shixiang was still expressionless and said, "I am a soldier of the Tang Empire, and I only carry out military orders." The official of the Imperial Center Administration hurried to the horse carriage behind and looked at the official of the military ministry, who waved his arms angrily and shouted, "The military must cooperate with our action. You immediately order the cavalry to attack." The official of the military ministry was silent. The official of the imperial astronomer, who had the lowest position, tried to persuade him, "Although the imperial court issued a document asking us to monitor and drive away, His Majesty did not say that we should take the initiative to attack." Ning Ke and Sang Sang had reappeared and were on the run, which caused a great disturbance in Chang'an. However, the forces within the empire had different views on this matter. Zhuge Warren, the chief officer of the Imperial Center Administration, was a trusted follower of the Empress. He wanted to gather the power of the empire to destroy the black horse carriage and kill Ning Ke, so as to remove a worry for the Empress. Although the Taoist cultivators of the Southern Gate Temple had no opinion on Ning Ke, they believed in Hao Yin, so of course they wanted to kill Sang Sang. Princess Liu was on good terms with Ning Ke and Sang Sang. However, in the face of the possible catastrophe of the human world, she had to remain silent. However, to everyone's surprise, the most powerful and important military force was not very active in this matter. For example, at this time, the high-ranking official of the military ministry had not said a word. The military of the Tang Empire had a very high status and only listened to the edicts of His Majesty and the military orders of their superiors. Therefore, The official of the Imperial Center Administration and the Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple could not force Ma Shixiang to attack with the cavalry of the city of Wei. Without the protection of the Tang cavalry, how could they dare to approach the black horse carriage? The cavalry of the city of Wei stood on the meadow and looked at the black horse carriage, while the people of the city of Wei stood on the earthen city wall and looked at the black horse carriage. Both inside and outside the city, the emotions were equally complicated. The people of the city of Wei had watched Ning Ke and Sang Sang grow up. They had never thought that Ning Ke would cause such a stir after leaving the city of Wei, and that his little handmaiden had become the Lady of Light. Ning Ke and Sang Sang were now well known in the world, and they were the most famous people in the history of the city of Wei. They were the pride of the city of Wei, the people who talked about them enthusiastically, and the light of the city of Wei. The boss of the gambling shop held the earthen arrow mound and looked at the black horse carriage in the distance. He sighed and said, "He still owes me more than a dozen gambling debts. It seems that he can never collect them in this lifetime." A black-faced ant looked at him and said sarcastically, "The silver that Ning Ke and Sang Sang send from Chong, and every month is distributed among the people of the city. Do you think that all the silver given to you has been fed to the dogs?" The boss of the gambling shop smiled awkwardly and then said nervously, "I'm just joking." Speaking of which, the little girl had a hard time carrying a flagon to buy wine every day. Who would have thought that she would later become the Lady of Light, and finally the daughter of Yama? The people on the earthen city wall of the city of Wei already had complicated emotions. Many of them looked at the black horse carriage in the distance with horror and fear, and their faces turned pale when they heard about the daughter of Yama. The ant looked at the people's expressions and spat down the earthen wall. "Bah! Ning Ke is full of evil tricks, and the whole city of Wei knows that. But Sang Sang is a kind girl. How could she be the daughter of Yama?" That's what the West Hill Divine Palace said. The West Hill Divine Palace said that all the Tangs are guilty. Why don't you jump down to atone for your sins? The quarrels and even insults in the city of Wei did not affect the hundreds of cavalrymen on the meadow. It was still silent. An officer who had just come to the city of Wei this year could not bear the depressing atmosphere and the strong pressure from the officials of the Imperial Center Administration. He whispered to Ma Shixiang, "General, killing the daughter of Yama is a great achievement. It's worth it even if it's risky." Ma Shixiang glanced at him and did not speak. Then he looked at the black horse carriage and frowned slightly. Suddenly he whipped the reins and went back to the meadow, ready to go back to the city. Hundreds of cavalrymen followed him down the meadow. A Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple rushed to the front of Ma Shixiang's horse with a gloomy face. He scolded, "Ma Shixiang, what are you doing? I'll kill you for running away in the face of battle." Ma Shixiang shouted, "If His Majesty has a decree, I will send troops. If His Majesty doesn't have a decree, you old Taoist is nothing." The officials of the Imperial Center Administration rushed over and scolded him severely. "Why did you stop the horse carriage outside the city?" Ma Shixiang said, "The horse carriage will not enter the city of Wei." The official scolded, "Ning Ke is going back to the academy. How can he not enter the city of Wei?" "What do you know?" Ma Shixiang looked at the official of the Imperial Center Administration and said contemptuously. Then he squeezed the horse's belly and pushed the official away. He led hundreds of cavalrymen away and soon entered the city of Wei. That night, Ma Shixiang and several adjutants, as well as all the cavalrymen who had participated in the activity of cutting firewood at Shubi Lake, crowded the only restaurant in the city of Wei. They talked about the story of Shubi Lake, the shabby courtyard, the little handmaiden carrying water, and the wine. Soon they drank all the wine stored by the owner of the restaurant. Ma Shixiang was the military chief of the city of Wei. No one dared to compete with him, so he drank the most. When he was drunk, he looked at the people in the restaurant and said, "When Ning Ke left the city of Wei, he said 3 words to me. Because of those 3 words, I won't kill him." An adjutant belched and said, "I asked you before what was the content of Ning Ke's 3 sentences, but you refused to tell me. Can you tell me now?" Ma Shixiang stroked his beard and said, "I can't say. I can't say. That night, Ma Shixiang was drunk, and the whole city of Wei was drunk. Not bad, only 10 minutes late. Everything else is fine, but my eyes are a little dizzy. Also, I write slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 657. The city of Wei was his hometown. The closer he was to the city of Wei, the more timid he felt. Looking at the dusty city in the distance and thinking of the years he spent here, even someone as indifferent as Ning Ke could not help but feel a little emotional. He looked past the city of Wei and continued to look south. He knew that there was Min Mountain, Hebei Prefecture, Chang, and the Tang Empire and the Academy. That was his and Sangsang's homeland, but they could not go there. Or rather, they did not want to go there, because they did not want to bring the heavy dark cloud over their heads into the Tang Empire and bring disaster to the Tang Empire. The black carriage stopped outside the city of Wei for a while and then set off again. It went around to the east, avoiding the 7 stockade villages and the border patrolling cavalries of the Northern Military Camp. The Northern Expedition Army had been stationed at the frontier all year round, responsible for monitoring and deterring the powerful and ambitious Golden Palace. They were well-trained and had fought countless tough battles. Whether in terms of armaments or military quality, they were the strongest among the 4 border armies of the Tang Empire. They were even stronger than the tens of thousands of cavalries under Xiaoho's command. Ning Ke used to be a member of the Northern Expeditionary Army. Of course, he knew how difficult it would be if he was discovered by the border patrolling cavalries. He had no confidence to escape from the Northern Military Camp. Moreover, he did not want to fight with his comrades. So he became extremely cautious and accurately followed the route planned on the military map. He kept walking in the buffer zone between the Tang Army and the Golden Palace, relying on his familiarity with the wilderness and the Northern Expeditionary Army. He passed through without any danger. As the escape continued, spring became deeper, but the two in the black carriage felt colder and colder. The walls of the carriage were covered with a thin layer of frost. It had nothing to do with the hot sea freezing and the approaching night. It was mainly because Sangsang's body was getting colder and colder, and her breath was like ice, and the black carriage kept going north. The Min Mountain, which stretched across the entire northern continent, was divided into 2 parts by a narrow gorge. People in the Central Plains used to call it the north and the south of the Min Mountain. People in the wilderness and some Taoists used to call the south the Min Mountain and the north the Tianqi Mountains, meaning the mountains abandoned by Hao Yin. At the western entrance of the narrow gorge that separated Min Mountain from the middle, there was a magnificent stronghold more than 1,000 feet high. It was called Helan, so the narrow gorge was also called the Helan Mountain Gap. Helan City was located in the depths of the wilderness, very close to the Golden Tribe Royal Court. However, it still belonged to the Tang Empire. It was the furthest territory of the Tang Empire. To be more precise, it was an enclave. This place was more than 1,000 miles away from Chang'an. If they wanted to transport supplies from the Tang mainland, the journey would be long and costly. Moreover, they needed many cavalrymen to protect them from being robbed by the horse gang or the fake horse gang. Even so, the tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could still cut off the supply route at any time. After spending so many resources and taking such a big risk, the Tang Empire still struggled to maintain the existence and normal operation of Helan City. It was not because of the psychological malady of the Tang Empire, but because Helan City was very important to the Tang Empire. This magnificent stronghold far away in the wilderness was the symbol of the Tang Empire's power and spirit in the wilderness. It was the confidence of the Tang Empire's business groups in the wilderness. Most importantly, this magnificent stronghold guarded the only passage to the eastern wilderness, which was very important to the Tang Empire's trade. It was like a sharp and thick knife inserted between Tianqi Mountain and Min Mountain, separating the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the Left King's Court. It was of great strategic importance. Looking at the towering city wall between the 2 cliffs, Sangsang thought of Chang'an. However, the city wall of Helan City was built between the cliffs, which was more shocking. The cold wind blew in. She coughed and looked at Ning Ke, asking, north or east? If they went north from here, they would go deeper into the wilderness along Tianqi Mountain. The cold land was sparsely populated. If they went further north, they would reach the front gate of Devil's Doctrine. If they went further north, they would reach the snowfield that few people had been to. If a place without people was the safest place, Ning Ke should have taken Sang Sang north to the snowfield. In that case, no one could find them except the great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace or the eminent monks of the Shinkong Temple. But for some reason, Ning Ke chose to go east. The further east they went, the closer they were to Healan City and the mountain. The white hair on the top of the mountain gradually turned into clear snow, and the steep cliffs gradually revealed themselves. Dark clouds covered Healan City. White clouds floated above the towering city wall. Hundreds of Tang soldiers appeared on the city wall. They could even hear the sounds of nooses being pulled and crossbows being pulled. There were 30 or 40 heavy carriages under the city wall. However, for some reason, the city gate was closed and the caravan was not allowed to enter. The atmosphere was very tense. Ning Ke looked at the dark clouds above his head and naturally knew why Healan City was closed. He thought that it was impossible to sneak into the caravan and pass the gate. The wheels of the carriage rumbled, but the ice and gravel on the ground did not scatter. Below Healan City, the attendants of the merchant group were hiding in their carriages to avoid the cold. They were thinking about how to contact the general in the city and quickly enter the city. Hearing the sound of the wheels of the carriage, they could not help but look back curiously. When they saw the black carriage, their expressions changed. Through the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace and the portrait annotations of various imperial courts, this black carriage was now very famous. Everyone knew that the legendary daughter of Yama was in this carriage. Healan City was in a panic. The shouts of the merchants and guards rose and fell one after another. The horses that were tired from the long journey neighed in fright. Someone saw the opportunity and ran to the foot of Healan City, banging on the city gate with all his might. The gate of Healan City was wedged deep into the mountain. It was made of iron and wood and was extremely heavy and thick. When the merchant's palms fell on the gate, it was like a mosquito's wings flapping on a stone. It could only make a very faint sound. Even if the soldiers in the city heard the sound, they would not open the gate at this time. When the dark clouds approached Healan City, the city gate was closed and no one was allowed to enter or leave. They were guarding against the black carriage. How could they give it a chance to rush into the city? The black carriage passed by the caravan of the caravan of the caravan. The frightened caravan hurriedly pulled the reins and moved the carriages further away to make way for the black carriage. After a moment of chaos, there was absolute silence, even dead silence. Ning Ke did not care about the merchants and guards who were on guard. He drove the carriage to the front of the mountain and walked to the city gate. He looked up at the two mountain-like gates. On the city wall, the sound of the crossbows gradually subsided. Several crossbows struggled to adjust their angles and aimed at Ning Quebec. Hundreds of archers and crossbowmen aimed at the black carriage a little further away, ready to shoot at any time. Even the sound of burning oil and stones could be heard. The Tang army in the city actually treated him as a troop to attack the city. Faced with so many well-trained Tang soldiers, even if all the cavalries and priests of the Golden Tribe Royal Court came out, they would not be able to attack the city in a short time. Ning Ke knew that he could not be forced. I am Ning Quebec. I want to pass the city. He looked up and said. His voice was not loud, but it clearly spread to the top of the city wall and into everyone's ears. Then he continued, I used to be a member of the Northern Expedition Army. I have made countless military achievements, which can be found in the archives of the military ministry. I don't want to fight with you. I just want to exchange my military achievements for a pass. Healan City was extremely important to the Tang Empire. The highest military officer in the military was habitually called General Healan. His position was second only to the 4 generals and a few old generals in Chang'an City. The current General Healan was named Han Qing. He had been stationed in the bitter cold city for more than 10 years. He was half barbarian, but he was deeply trusted by His Majesty and was given such an important task. Under the protection of more than 10 shield-bearers, General Han Qing came to the city wall. He looked down at Ning Ke and said, Tang soldiers are ashamed to talk about asking for rewards. Don't even think about bringing the daughter of Yama into the city. I don't want to enter the city. I want to cross the city. This road is blocked. Why not? As a general of the Tang Empire, how can I let you bring this demoness into the city of Tang? In your eyes, my wife will bring disaster to the world, so you don't let us pass? That's right. If the carriage passes the city, it will be out of the Tang Empire. Even if it is a disaster, it will only bring disaster to others. Why not? If I go to the East Wilderness, I will accept my fate. But I don't want to be killed in my own country. General Han Qing seemed to be touched by Ning Ke's last sentence and remained silent. A deputy general beside him said anxiously, General, what are you hesitating for? This person is so stupid that he dares to curse under the city wall. Quickly release the arrows and stones and seize the opportunity to kill this person. Another deputy general frowned slightly and said, Is Ning Ke so easy to kill? No matter how powerful a cultivator is, he can't be killed. I said it's not easy to kill. Not that he can't be killed, but in the Tang Empire, no one is willing to do it. Don't forget that he is Mr. 13 of the Academy. These days, when the dark clouds came, the military ministry and the northern military camp were extremely quiet and did not seriously search for this black carriage. Why? Because he doesn't want to bear this responsibility. Do you want us to bear it? Are you really going to let him bring the daughter of Yama into the city? Of course not. But this is a cultivator's business. If we want to kill him, we have to wait for the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple to come. The daughter of Yama will destroy the whole world. This is not a cultivator's business. It is all our responsibility. As soldiers, how can we be so timid and given? Stop arguing. General Han Qing scolded coldly, whether it is to kill or let go, or to block him outside Healan City and wait for those cultivators to come. It is not something we can decide ourselves. General, what are you going to do? Of course I will ask His Majesty. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.